A large number of star beasts were stationed in this starry void. These star beasts were extremely strange. They could somehow survive without air. Going into this region was extremely dangerous. Several star beasts emerged out of nowhere and surrounded them as soon as Hua Menghan's voice faded. These star beasts were even more tyrannical than the ones Yishiwen had encountered in the foreign battlefield. Each of these star beasts was pitch black. Their entire body was covered with scales. These fish-type star beasts had ominous fangs, and each of them looked extremely powerful. They nearly possessed the strength of legendary 8th or 9th stage. Their leader was at semi-sage realm. It was exceptionally powerful. Puff! 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 Each of these fanged star beasts spat water spears in unison. These attacks were centered at Yishiwen and Hua Menghan. Yishiwen didn't get enough time to attack, but Hua Menghan had already launched one. A flaming lotus appeared in her hand. It then expanded to face the attacks. Bang! A huge explosion occurred. The flaming lotus exploded among those strange fish-like star beasts. The terrifying temperature of the explosion destroyed those strange fish-like beasts. They couldn't even approach those two. The chief fish-like star beast was at the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. It was wounded by the flaming lotus explosion. So, it roared as it opened its big mouth, and ferociously rushed towards Yishiwen to bite him. Its big mouth nipped at Yishiwen, and the void was broken into pieces. It was an extremely terrifying scene. Yishiwen dodged and rushed up. He sneered. His big hand stretched out towards that chief strange fish-like beast to grab it. This strange headfish was extremely tyrannical. So much so that it could bite an ordinary expert of initial stage of the semi-sage realm to death. However, how could Yishiwen be taken lightly? Even an expert of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm was no match for him. He could effortlessly grab this chief strange fish. It was a piece of cake for him. Roar! The chief fish was caught by Yishiwen. It roared, screamed, and struggled. However, Yiziwen's giant golden hand had firmly grabbed it. Bang! This huge strange fish was the size of a small mountain, but Yishiwen pinched to explosion. It got transformed into a mass of blood fog. Its flesh was absorbed by the heavenly source mirror, and its inner core was absorbed by Yishiwen. This replenished the solar system in his universe. His solar system hadn't been perfected yet. Yemo was absorbing the accumulated flesh and blood inside the heavenly source mirror. He sat cross-legged as he floated over the blood pond. He constantly extracted the energy from the star colossus so that he could use it to strengthen himself and upgrade the heavenly source mirror. The heavenly source mirror's combat power was already knocking on the door of the sage realm. It would finally complete the first step of its restoration if it could cross this gateway. Moreover, Yemo would be able to condense his own body. He would finally be able to separate his soul from the mirror then. Therefore, Yemo was exceptionally careful in upgrading the heavenly source mirror. A majority of the primary spirit dawn they had received in the last 1 year had been absorbed by the heavenly source mirror. So, it had made successive breakthroughs. However, it wasn't that simple to break through to the sage realm. The heavenly source mirror was better than the other divine tools because it was a high-grade tool. It was only broken and incomplete at present, nothing more. However, it could enhance itself as long as there was sufficient energy. This was its biggest advantage. Other divine tools had to face one tribulation after another for each subsequent upgrade. In fact, they must suffer a lot before they could become a sage tool. The sage realm was a very large watershed for martial experts. And it was same for the divine tools. A tool would gradually begin to gain its own spirit once it had become a sage tool. Thereafter, its strength would increase very significantly. Some tools might even gain their own body like Yemo would. No matter whether it was an expert or a divine tool, they would become extraordinary once the sage word was attached to them. Yishiwen and Hua Menghan were extraordinary. Hua Menghan's flame had effortlessly grabbed the star beasts in that vast area, and had then burnt them to death in one fell swoop. Her attack could deal with a large numbers of enemies with ease. Yishiwen had no choice but to admit defeat in front of such an attack. He had no choice but to acknowledge that Hua Menghan was more powerful than him in this regard. The two of them joined forces, and continued to exterminate the beasts along their route. They had soon eradicated the star beasts of this area. However, this was just the beginning. The true Martial University was in the vicinity. So, those star beasts weren't considered very strong. They weren't like the Sage Realm and the Great Sage Realm star beasts that were present in the depths of this starry space. They proceeded towards a nearby assembly point. This place was known as the Wind Dragon City. They continued to eradicate the beasts that came in their way. There were many cities in this vast starry space. These cities were treated as nodal points in this mesh of stars. The Wind Dragon City was a nearby assembly point. It was a big city, and had a population of over 1 million. Many experts who traveled in the void would choose these cities to stop over for some time. The Wind Dragon City was regarded as a tyrannical place in the region. It had been reported that the city lord was a senior expert of Great Sage Complete Realm. He was alone a deterring force, and the experts of the nearby areas didn't dare to act presumptuous in front of him. This starry space was similar to the exile places on Earth. Many experts who could no longer stay in the true martial world had escaped into the void. So, the people who came here were often rebellious and unruly fellows. It was impossible to deter these guys without being tyrannical. This starry space might seem close to the true martial world. However, the distance between the chaotic heavenly territory and the true martial world was over 30,000 kilometers. How could it be easy to arrive there? A distance of 30,000 kilometers wouldn't have been a problem if the conditions on the way were normal and stable. However, the presence of star beasts and astral winds had made it a dangerous place. These beasts were always ready to incite trouble. These two had to move side by side, and were forced to exterminate the star beasts they met in order to advance. This would lend them great benefits in the future because exterminating these star beasts was an important task. The true Martial University and the other forces undertook this task very seriously. One must know that there was unending internal chaos among the forces of the true martial world. However, they would all unite when it came to dealing with foreign aggression. This foreign aggression was mostly headed by two groups. One was the Devil World. They would poke their nose into the true martial world's affairs from time to time. And the second was the Star Beasts. An enormous threat might be posed for the true martial world if a star colossus were to take birth among these star beasts present in the starry space. After all, what was the reason behind the true martial university's decline? They had opposed the invasion of a star colossus, and had thoroughly declined as a result. This had given an opportunity to the other forces to rise. Therefore, the true martial university and the other forces took it as an important duty to eradicate these star beasts from time to time. They had been collectively killing star beasts for many years. It wasn't easy for a powerful star beast to take birth among these small and weak star beasts. However, there was always such danger. Moreover, these star beasts reproduced very quickly. So, it was required to wipe them out timely. Otherwise, they could pose a huge threat to the true martial world even without the leadership of a star colossus. Moreover, so many of these star beasts would make people's life difficult if they weren't exterminated from time to time. However, no one came to clean up the area frequently. Yi Shiwen and Hua Meihan advanced towards the Wind Dragon City, and continued to exterminate the star beasts throughout their route. To be continued. Chapter 407. The two of them flew towards the Wind Dragon City, and continued to wipe out the star beasts that came in their way. They flew continuously for 10 days and 10 nights, and finally got close to the Wind Dragon City. They didn't take any rest during these 10 days and nights. And they continued to slaughter the star beasts. Yi Shiwen was unceasingly absorbing the star core, either to transform his universe, or to strengthen his principles. He had undergone a number of upgrades in a short span of time. The principles he had recently condensed couldn't be compared with the ones he had done earlier. He had been using the star cores as nourishment. His growth speed had been nearly 10 times that of an average person, thanks to the non-stop and crazy struggle with these star beasts for 10 whole days. Hua Menghan's cultivation had also become more pure and proficient. She was just one step away from entering the later stage of the semi-sage realm. She was about to enter the later stage of the semi-sage realm. However, this wasn't the biggest surprise for Yishiwen. Rather, it was that the restoration process of Heavenly Source Mirror. It had reached the completion of the first step after it had absorbed the flesh and blood of countless star beasts. Yemo had dived deeper inside the mirror to complete the restoration. The Heavenly Source Mirror would perhaps be restored to the Sage Realm after the completion of this step. It would be able to provide a huge assistance to Yishiwen thereafter. Yishiwen would certainly be able to compete with the Sage experts with this Sage tool in his hands once he had entered the later stage of the Semi-Sage Realm. He wouldn't fall into a disadvantageous situation. However, it must be assumed that his Sage-level opponent wouldn't possess a Sage tool of their own. Not all Sage experts possessed Sage tools. Only the wealthy and outstanding Sage experts kept Sage tools. These two individuals had continuously flown for 10 days and 10 nights. They had flown at full strength, and had unceasingly exterminated the star beasts along the way. An average person would have already died if they were in their place. However, these two weren't ordinary people. The fast regeneration speed of Hua Menghan's Heavenly Phoenix Bodhi's magical power could frighten anyone. And Yi Zaiwen's gilded tyrant form was extremely intrepid. He had only used his body to beat so many star beasts to death. He hadn't used his real elemental energy at all. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about anything, and forged their path with the blood of the star beasts. There were many other common threats present in this starry sky, such as meteorites, the space turbulence, as well as the rogue chaos that floated in the space, the magnetic field storms, and so on. They hadn't experienced these things in the past. Both of them were Heaven's Pride level experts, but they still had to face great difficulties in dealing with these unusual situations. Yishiwen knew about some of these things from his previous life. However, he had never experienced them in person. He had never cared to find out more about them either. After all, he had never thought that he would be walking inside the void of the universe in person. Even a truth-level expert had the ability to survive in the space. However, the sheer amount of dangers present in the space was unimaginable. One would be lost forever if one didn't possess the strength of Semi-Sage Realm. In fact, even the Semi-Sage experts only dared to travel on the edge of this space. They didn't dare to penetrate inside. The existence of a human expert was too tiny in this vast universe. Yishiwen, a turbulent group of meteorites is flying towards us. Hua Menghan gently alerted Yishiwen. Yishiwen raised his head to look forward. He saw several thousand meteorites in the distant space. They were rapidly approaching them. It seemed as if there was some kind of unseen attraction force in play that was attracting those meteorites towards them. It seemed like a long-range raid of the meteorites was approaching from very far away. Soon, this group of meteorites wasn't too far from them. These two couldn't hide or dodge even if they tried to. This universe might seem vacuum and empty at one glance. However, it was brimming with all kinds of magnetic fields. The power of these two individuals wasn't enough to send out their divine senses very far away from themselves. That was why they had discovered this group of meteorites only when it had come so close. This was also the reason why they were constantly bumping into star beasts, and were forced to slaughter their way out every time. This was all because the search range of their divine sense wasn't very long. Therefore, there was no way to avoid such meaningless fights. However, there were no formidable star beasts present here, fortunately. These two would rarely come across the star beasts of the Semi-Sage realm. Moreover, Yishiwen could deal with two Semi-Sage beasts at once without breaking a sweat. "Sister, you take a break first. Let me deal with it." Yishiwen laughed out loud and said, "Okay." Hua Menghan smiled as she looked at Yishiwen. He was still beaming with energy and vigor, but she looked tired. Each of these experts possessed martial arts within their bodies to keep them energized. Capable experts like these two wouldn't be affected even if they didn't sleep for 1 or 10 years, under normal circumstances. However, fighting continuously like this was a different thing. It must have exhausted their minds. Her heavenly phoenix Bodis had indeed restored her real elemental energy very quickly. And that would have saved her body from getting tired. However, the exhaustion of one's mind and spirit couldn't be avoided. However, Yishiwen was different. His gilded tyrant form was exceptionally tyrannical. He possessed incredible strength even when he didn't use his real elemental energy. Moreover, Yishiwen had often come across such long and excruciating battles in the past. His battles had often lasted for several days and several nights. He had experienced the most number of fights among all the Heaven's Pride level experts. He had never experienced the privileged and favorable practice conditions that were bestowed upon the other Heaven's Pride level experts. Rather, he had constantly struggled to slaughter his way up to this level. He was self-made, and had earned his success from the battles he had fought thus far. Fighting for several days and nights was normal for him. Clang! The sword intention appeared in Yi Zaiwen's hand and rumbled loudly. It suddenly expanded and transformed into a huge sword. He then brandished the sword towards those meteorites to chop them down at once. Bang! 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 The sword intention chopped up those meteorites into fine pieces. This task might have been very troublesome for an ordinary expert of the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. They could have been knocked down by this group of meteorites if caught off guard. However, it seemed like nothing to Yishiwen. Hua Menghan immediately followed after Yishiwen as he rushed through that group of meteorites. She said, "You don't consider these meteorites anything, isn't it?" She obviously wasn't afraid of these meteorites either. Her heavenly flame could burn these meteorites to ashes. Even Yishiwen had been flattered by her large-scale attacks since it could easily take on large groups. In fact, he had been stunned by her ability. However, Yishiwen had an upper hand when it came to the ease involved in his way to deal with groups. That was because he didn't need to consume too much real elemental energy, unlike her. Yishiwen laughed mischievously and spoke. "Sister, you are flattering me. This is just a sword technique I've recently learnt. It's extremely sharp and swift. Buried person's sword." Yishiwen shouted loudly. A sword intention appeared in his hand. It appeared like some form of a mystical entity. It then exploded into countless sword shadows. They overwhelmingly spread out towards the group of meteorites to chop them down. Bang! 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 Those meteorites had been chopped and reduced to dust by that bright sword beam. The sight was similar to the most dazzling fireworks in the sky. Yishiwen had already practiced the buried sword secrets to the perfection level. He initially hadn't understood many of the concepts, but he had come to understand them now. The road to practice the swordsmanship to perfection was simply disastrous. Buried person, buried earth, buried heaven, and then the great nirvana at last. The great nirvana could break everything in existence, and re-establish a very new great Tao. It had sounded awesome in Yi Mo's words. However, one couldn't always get the opportunity to practice it to the peak level. However, they had started to feel more and more heat for some reason. They looked in the star map, and found a white dwarf in the vicinity. It used to be a star once. However, it had perished and transformed into a white dwarf. So, it was silently hanging nearby. "Who are you?" Suddenly, a loud shout sounded from afar. A group of warriors came flying out of nowhere. They blocked Yishiwen and Hua Menghan's path, and glared at them coldly. To be continued. Chapter 408. "Who are you?" Suddenly, a loud shout sounded from afar. A group of warriors came out flying out of nowhere. They blocked Yishiwen and Hua Menghan's way, and coldly glared at them. "Who are you two? How dare you come here? Don't you know that this is young Master Feng's restricted territory?" One of those individuals flew out and shouted coldly. A bunch of tyrannical divine senses swept all over. Yishiwen and Hua Menghan immediately became anxious. Hundreds of tyrannical divine senses had performed soul searches across this area, all at once. Most of these divine senses belonged to experts of the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. However, many among them also belonged to the ones at the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. There was no legendary expert among them. It was quite difficult for legendary experts to move freely in the void of the universe. They could at most travel between some assembly nodal points, that too under the leadership of semi-sage experts only. However, they would basically be a burden. But Yishiwen was completely different. He was even more ferocious than the experts of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. Yishiwen and Hua Menghan hadn't anticipated that they would bump into a gang of experts and meddle with their business. At least hundreds of strong divine senses were floating in the vicinity. And each one was of the semi-sage level. There was surely a big conspiracy in place since so many semi-sage experts were gathered at one place. And these two had suddenly intruded into their territory. It was obviously impossible for the opposite party to maintain a good countenance. "Excuse us. We had no intention to offend you," Yishiwen calmly spoke. "We will leave immediately." Their priority was to rush to the Wind Dragon City. They would obviously prefer to have one less trouble on the way. "You think you can come and go as you want? That's wishful thinking. It just so happens that this man's aptitude is better among these two. He's freely roaming in the space even though he has the trivial strength of the legendary realm. We can capture him and turn him into a slave. And that woman is extremely beautiful. We can capture her and offer her to young Master Feng as his 326th mistress. Ha ha! He will give us enormous rewards. I'm just afraid these two are probably the disciples of some big school." "What are you afraid of? Isn't our young Master Feng using a matrix method to extract the core of that white dwarf? He's also looking for a way to devour the core. He can make a breakthrough into the sage realm after that. Then, he will be able to oppress everyone in this vicinity with his tyranny. There's nothing to be afraid of." These people were discussing without any hesitation in front of Yishiwen and Hua Menghan. They obviously looked down on these two, perhaps because they considered these two individuals to be like the meat placed on a chopping block. It seemed as if they just needed to decide how to chop and when to chop. Yishiwen immediately raised his eyebrow. An angry look appeared on his face. He hadn't wished to get involved in this matter. However, it seemed like the other party had now given him enough reasons to get involved. Hua Menghan frowned. A disgusted look appeared on her face. The opposite party's obscene words had made her furious. She felt disgusted. "Brothers, attack!" one of the experts shouted. Several dozen experts of the initial stage of the semi-sage realm emerged from behind, and surrounded Yishiwen and Hua Menghan. They were looking at the two of them with malicious intentions. They were drooling over the beautiful Hua Menghan in particular. "It seems like we don't have any choice but to slaughter them." Yishiwen used his divine sense to communicate this to Hua Menghan. Hua Menghan nodded. Neither of them wanted to indulge in a fight with these people. They didn't want to fight an unnecessary battle. But these people didn't wish to let them go. "Attack!" Yishiwen shouted loudly. "Strike first and gain the upper hand, or suffer." Yishiwen knew this well. He shot fire cloud's falling sky hand. It appeared like a boundless burning cloud as it advanced towards those people to grab them. These semi-sage experts weren't some ordinary people. They responded almost immediately. "This man has dared to launch an attack on us. He's courting death. I've changed my mind. I don't wish to make him a slave anymore. I want him dead. Destroy his soul too, so that he can never reincarnate again." That semi-sage expert wasn't a good person. He had been enraged by Yishiwen. And so, he ordered in an angry manner. The fire cloud's falling sky hand went across the vast space. It seemed as if its energy would swallow the entire world. The attack appeared majestic. It seemed as if a heavenly hand had swept down to burn down the whole world. Bang! 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 The attacks of those experts of semi-sage realm were instantly grabbed by the fire cloud's falling sky hand, and were crushed into fine powder. However, the hand didn't stop here. The hand then rushed towards those semi-sage experts to grasp them. Bang! 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 Those semi-sage experts were grabbed by Yizaiwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand. Then, he crushed them. Those experts of the initial stage of semi-sage realm were turned into blood fog. They were no match for Yishiwen. They weren't even as good as those lightning soldiers. Not to mention, Yi Zaiwen's strength had increased countless times after he had crossed that heavenly tribulation. Now, he was far more tyrannical than he was before. Hua Menghan had also begun to attack. Her jade hands unleashed several secret seal techniques. The entire world suddenly began to heat up in an abnormal manner. The world began to burn as if it was set on fire. Everything in the radius of 5 kilometers had submerged in a burning sea of silver-white flames. This looked extremely scary. Those experts of the initial stage of semi-sage realm didn't get the time to escape. They were burned alive. They were reduced to ashes within seconds. Several experts of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm couldn't take on these flames either. They met with the same fate. They possessed far more tyrannical skills than those experts of the initial stage of semi-sage realm did. Therefore, they didn't burn to death in an instant like their weaker comrades had. However, it was even more horrible for them since they suffered extreme pain. First, their principles burned down. Then, their bodies, and finally their souls got exterminated. Their obscene words had thoroughly infuriated Hua Menghan. So, she had started to use her most fierce attacks. She hadn't held anything back. These so-called subordinates of young Master Feng didn't know that they had messed with the wrong people this time. However, they quickly realized that these two weren't some random cultivators with no background. One was extremely fierce, while the other was very spicy. "Stop! How dare you attack us? Do you know who we are?" An incomparably terrified semi-sage expert spoke up. He was an expert of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. He had just played the role of the leader a moment ago. However, he was no match for Yishiwen and Hua Menghan. These two individuals weren't ordinary people. The ordinary semi-sage realm experts were practically no match for them. Yishiwen sneered. The Han's Han seal pounded down from above. This semi-sage realm expert was smashed and turned into blood fog. He couldn't even fight back. He would have never been able to stop Yi Zaiwen's attack. That was because even a causal fist attack of Yi Zaiwen's carried the power released by the combined attacks of dozens of experts of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. Yishiwen slaughtered several experts of semi-sage realm in a matter of moments. They simply didn't stand a chance against these two. They were preparing to leave when, suddenly a loud shout sounded. "Who are you two? Do you wish to die?" A big hand cut open the void, and advanced towards Yishiwen and Hua Menghan to grab them. A terrifying power was boiling upon that hand. This power was invoking a grandiose pressure on those two. Yishiwen wasn't deterred one bit. He used his hands to counter. They got shrouded in endless golden light, and ripped that big hand apart. "Sister Hua, let's get out of here quickly!" Yishiwen shouted. This big hand turned out to be of a peak expert of the later stage of semi-sage realm. Neither of these two could match him. Hua Menghan trod on the rainbow light without any hesitation, and immediately flew away. Her speed wasn't slow, even when compared with the speed of Yi Zaiwen's devil wings. She possessed a top-tier agility technique. She had traveled 1,000 feet in the blink of an eye. Yi Zaiwen's speed wasn't slow either. He opened his devil wings, and followed after Hua Menghan. Bang! That big hand grasped down as soon as Yishiwen left. The entire space was caught by that big hand. A large section of the surrounding space collapsed, and the chaos leaked out from the other side. "Damn it! Don't you ever make young Master Feng see you again! Or else!" The angry voice of a young man sounded from direction of the White Dwarf. Yishiwen and Hua Menghan flew away for hundreds of miles. They came to a halt after they realized that nobody was pursuing them. Both of them were gasping for breath. They looked at each other, and burst into laughter. "They wouldn't pursue us till here," Hua Menghan said. "Yes." Yishiwen nodded. They had flown hundreds of miles away from there, and the opposite party hadn't pursued them. There was obviously some reason that had kept them there. There must have been a reason why they hadn't chased after these two. Suddenly, Yishiwen recalled what one of those experts had said. It seemed like they were about to extract the core of the White Dwarf. One could imagine how precious the core of a star could be. It was the essence of the entire star. The white dwarf was a dead star. However, its core was still a priceless treasure. However, the entire white dwarf could explode if one wasn't careful. The power of the explosion would be extremely terrifying. Everyone in the proximity of countless miles would be killed. Sister, you proceed to the Wind Dragon City. I will join you later, Yishiwen said. What are you going to do? Hua Menghan asked. I'm going to give them a pleasant surprise. Yishiwen laughed mischievously and stated. His eyes glittered like the tip of a sharp weapon. That's extremely dangerous. They have an expert of the later stage of the semi-sage realm. And it seems like there's more than one. You won't be able to deal with them alone. Hua Menghan spoke in a worried tone. Relax. There won't be a problem. They can't catch me with the kind of speed they possess. Yishiwen tried to console Hua Menghan. He wasn't consoling her with nonsense. One must know that an average person couldn't match the speed of Yi Zaiwen's devil wings. Moreover, Yishiwen had also perfected his tyrant body technique till the 6th layer. He wasn't an opponent for the opposite party. However, it would be impossible for them to kill him in an instant. And his Phoenix regeneration technique with its superfast regeneration speed would quickly restore him back to normal if they weren't able to kill him in an instant. In effect, he wasn't an opponent of the experts of the later stage of semi-sage realm, but they must also give up on the idea of taking him down. All right, I will also come with you, Hua Menghan stated. She was still worried for Yishiwen. Moreover, the vulgar words of those people had made her extremely angry. You don't need to come. It will be easier if I go alone. I know that I'm not capable of defeating them. However, they can't take me down either. I wish to give them a pleasant surprise this time, Yishiwen stated as he laughed. To be continued. Chapter 409. Hua Menghan didn't insist after she listened to Yishiwen. She knew that Yishiwen would only say something like this when he was confident. Several people had said that Yishiwen was extremely arrogant and rampant. However, that was only true when he was attacked, and was compelled to counterattack. He wasn't stupid, and his thought process was also reasonable. Yishiwen hadn't entered the semi-sage realm yet. However, Hua Menghan knew that Yishiwen wasn't inferior to her. In addition, he was far more suitable than her for these circumstances. Yishiwen flew back without any hesitation after he had bid farewell to Hua Menghan. He had hidden his presence by operating the restraining breath technique. The golden divine beam on Yi Zaiwen's devil wings had been shrouded by thick black fog along with his entire body. Therefore, he could move ahead unseen. He was perfectly camouflaged in this pitch-black space. Yishiwen slowly approached that white dwarf. He saw that a massive matrix formation was covering that white dwarf. It looked extremely mysterious. Some incomprehensible energy was wandering inside it. Four elderly experts of the later stage of the semi-sage realm were sitting cross-legged around that barrier. They were kneading with their finger to maintain a profound seal technique. A 20-year-old young man was sitting cross-legged over this formation. He looked quite handsome, yet strangely demonic. He was clad in a magnificent robe. The power inside the barrier was bubbling up towards him. His complexion was extremely ugly at this moment. An extremely evil look was present on his handsome face. Damn it! Don't let me catch you, or I will crush your bones and burn you to ashes, the young man said with an evil expression on his handsome face. He was the one who had launched an attack on Yishiwen. However, Yishiwen had managed to escape. The tyrannical expression on his face had distorted his handsome look. He looked extremely frightening. I will find those two bastards after I'm done swallowing the inner core of the white dwarf and made my breakthrough into the sage realm. They must be killed because they've committed the crime of opposing our Feng clan. Young Master Feng roared like a lion whose tail had been stepped on. Young Master Feng, don't be impatient. I've already sent out a message out. I've asked our Feng clan's forces to look for the whereabouts of those two individuals. They can't run away. But they are probably the disciples of one of the forces of the true martial world. This matter can be troublesome later. One of those four old men opened his mouth and spoke. The true martial world. So what? It doesn't matter who they are, or where they've come from. Those who dare to provoke our Phone clan shall be punished. Young Master Phone roared. Fortunately, he was busy in maintaining the seal technique, and couldn't afford to cause any chaos right now. Young Master Phone will enter the Sage Realm once he swallows the inner core. Then, he will become the main focus of our clan's resources and nurturing. He will be able to mobilize more experts of our clan. Then, we can even make the true martial world's Heaven's Pride level experts disappear without any traces if they oppose us. Another old man spoke. Yi Shiwen pondered. He realized that this Phone clan was probably a huge force in the heavenly chaotic territory. Otherwise, they wouldn't have looked down on the forces of the true martial world. However, young Master Feng still wanted to wait until he had swallowed the inner core. Then, he would start to cause trouble for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered. How he could allow the opposite party to succeed. Yi Shiwen was hidden nearby, and wished to give them a big surprise. However, it might cause a huge problem for him if he allowed the opposite party to enter the Sage Realm. After all, a person would land himself in big trouble if a Sage Realm expert was dead set on causing trouble for the said person. Yi Shiwen! Yi Shiwen suddenly heard a shout. It came from the insides of his mind. This was Yi Mo's voice. Yi Shiwen was pleasantly surprised by this and said, How did you wake up so soon? Weren't you upgrading yourself to a Sage tool? I've already completed the upgradation process. The Heavenly Source Mirror has become a Sage tool now. Yi Mo laughed and said, That's great. Yi Shiwen also laughed out loud and replied, Several limitations that had previously existed have vanished since it has become a Sage tool. Yi Mo spoke as he laughed. We can now push the level of that blood slave to the later stage of the semi-sage realm. Then, nobody will be able to match the blood slave, unless a sage expert appears. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt relaxed. He would have far more assurance if he had the assistance of a blood slave of the later stage of the semi-sage realm. He had previously planned that he would leave after he had stolen the White Dwarf's inner core. But now, he didn't wish to leave without dealing a serious blow to these experts. Yi Shiwen went inside the Heavenly Source Mirror after he had made the decision. The world inside the Heavenly Source Mirror had suddenly expanded by 10 times after it had become a Sage tool. It appeared endless. In fact, it appeared like a small continent. It certainly wasn't the size of the world in itself. However, it was big enough for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen arrived at the edge of the blood pond. That star colossus was still boiling inside the blood pond, but it had become very weak. The suppression force of the Heavenly Source Mirror had grown after it had become a Sage tool. So, it didn't even have enough power to struggle. Its entire body was bound in a chain of magical symbols made up of principles. Its strength was being sucked away, little by little. It could only stare at Yi Shiwen with hatred, nothing more. It didn't even have the energy to roar. Yi Shiwen could now do many things since the Heavenly Source Mirror had become a Sage tool. And the first thing he would do was to forcefully level up the blood slave. Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged over the blood pond. He stretched out his big hand and grabbed several principles. He condensed magical symbol out of the principles and instilled them inside the blood slave. The Tao principles flooded into the blood slave. Its aura started to become more powerful. It became more and more formidable with every passing moment. The primary spirit dawn were unceasingly burning inside the Heavenly Source Mirror. The transformed spirit energy was being instilled into the blood slave. 200. 300. 400. 500. The time passed in the outside world, second by second, minute by minute. Almost a month had passed in the blink of an eye. The unceasing extraction of the White Dwarf's inner core was still taking place. This was a very big task. Therefore, nobody was acting impatiently in this regard. Yi Shiwen was still lurking nearby. He was constantly condensing principles in order to instill them into the blood slave. The blood slave could even be promoted to the sage realm since the heavenly source mirror had become a sage tool. However, Yishuan didn't have enough energy to make that happen. Therefore, he could only condense approximately 800 Tao principles. There was no way to make the blood slave break through to the sage realm. However, it was temporarily good enough for the current Yishuan. It was enough for him to give them a big surprise. Time passed slowly. Yishuan felt that the white dwarf was getting hotter and hotter. It slowly began to disseminate enormous amounts of heat. Bang! A loud explosion occurred. Endless amount of lava began to erupt from that white dwarf. The lava soared into the space for tens of thousands of feet. Suddenly, Yishuan had a cold feeling in his heart. He realized that these guys had genuinely managed to force out the inner core. Then, the inner core began to condense by absorbing the essence of the entire star. The terrifying force caused an endless amount of lava to erupt and disperse in the space. This was an extremely frightening scene. However, a cheerful look appeared on the faces of those experts of the Feng clan. Young Master Feng was also jubilant at the sight. After all, he had finally begun to see the result of his long-drawn efforts. He could rise to great heights once he swallowed the inner core and became a sage expert. He would obviously become very different from his present mere semi-sage expert then. There simply was no comparison between the two. His present status in the Feng clan couldn't be compared with the one he would relish at that time. This white dwarf had taken birth after its parent star had died. It was the same as the other things in this world. It also went from the time of its birth to that of its flourish, and then to its death. It couldn't escape from the laws of life and death, even though it was a star. However, the lifespan of these stars was much greater than that of an average person's. They could easily last for billions of years. These stars were a source of light in the universe. This star had died and turned into a white dwarf, but it still contained incredible power. Young Master Feng had used a special method to condense that power into the extracted inner core. And the core contained enough energy to help him step into the sage realm in one fell swoop. One could only imagine the kind of energy contained in it. The white dwarf exploded. It suddenly emitted incredible light and heat. It seemed as if it had suddenly reached the peak of its prosperity once again. It illuminated all directions. One would only assume it to be daylight when they'd gaze at the sky from the true martial world. This special flash of starlight was precisely the dying flash of this star. The accumulated energy had burst out in a flash. And this was only the inner core of a dead star. It was simply impossible to imagine the amount of power the inner core of a mature star would possess. Let alone the inner core of a massive world like the true martial world. The inner core of the white dwarf contained a massive amount of energy. However, the inner core was merely the size of a fist. A tiny inner core like this one possessed such enormous energy. Young Master Feng couldn't resist anymore. He rushed towards that tiny inner core of the white dwarf. He had wanted to obtain the inner core of this white dwarf since long. He had been waiting here for several years in order to find an opportunity to obtain it. This inner core had finally emerged. So, it was finally the time to obtain it. An overjoyed expression appeared on his face. Yishuan had remained hidden for quite a long time. However, he finally moved into action at this time. He stretched out his big golden palm towards that inner core to grab it. To be continued. Chapter 410. This type of a white dwarf had previously been unattainable to some extent. After all, the universe was incredibly huge. There were many stars in the sky. However, every star was situated very far away, more so in the case of a dead star. One would obtain many benefits if one could grab it. In fact, the benefits were almost beyond one's imagination. However, it was quite difficult for an average person to come across such resource. The legendary realm was considered as ordinary in the heavenly chaotic territory. Legendary experts were treated as ordinary people. The semi-sage realm possessed the same status. However, the sage realm was different. The sage experts obtained everyone's respect and attention wherever they went. Some were even the lords of some remote areas, and ruled their respective territories without any problem. Sage Realm was like a watershed. People below the Sage Realm were like ants, and were considered as ordinary existence. Only outstanding people could become sage experts by transcending their ordinary mortal lives. Their lifespans could also increase from 1,000 years of the legendary realm to 2,000 years in one fell swoop. And this inner core was the biggest opportunity to achieve that. There was greed in young Master Feng's eyes. He had spent 10 years of his life to make arrangements in order to obtain this inner core. He had to find several important materials which were required for putting up the matrix formation. Finally, he had managed to extract this inner core after a year's time. He would transform after he had swallowed it. He would transform into a dragon from a fish, and hence become extraordinary. The other old men felt somewhat envious as they watched him. However, their moods suddenly changed, and their feelings of jealousy disappeared. They knew what stuff they could dip their fingers in, and where they couldn't. And this was definitely not something they should covet. However, just when young Master Feng was about to grab the inner core, a big golden hand appeared out of nowhere, and stole the inner core in front of him. Young Master Feng was left dumbstruck by this sudden turn of events. He couldn't control his anger, and immediately became furious. He had struggled for 10 years in order to obtain this inner core. And someone else had appeared and snatched it away when it was the time to taste the fruit of his labors. How could this not make him furious? Attack! A loud shout sounded. Suddenly, a terrifying blood light condensed into a blood man. This bloody figure swept out its palm towards young Master Feng to slap him. Bang! This palm attack was devastating, and it seemed as if the world itself had been shattered. The void had been crumbled and eroded by the blood light. The terrifying force began to boil, and press down upon young Master Feng's body. It destroyed his protective energy barrier, and crushed the bones in his chest. Puff! Blood spurted out of young Master Feng's body as he was sent flying into space. Nobody had seen what had really happened. They only saw him getting blown away by an explosion. He didn't lose his consciousness. But there was rage in his eyes since they could only stare helplessly as a stranger stole the White Dwarf's inner core. Yi Shiwen had grabbed the White Dwarf's inner core. The White Dwarf was extremely hot, but its inner core wasn't. It should be mentioned that all the energy was condensed inside the inner core. It would discharge an enormous power if it exploded. Who are you? The other 4 experts of the later stage of Semi-Sage Realm asked. They hadn't paid much attention earlier since they didn't care much. They indeed seemed excited at first. However, that was just excitement, nothing more. After all, they knew that the inner core didn't belong to them. They were merely protecting it by holding the barrier up. However, this sudden turn of events had left their minds vacant. They found out that young Master Feng had been sent flying out before they could understand what was going on. Those 4 experts of the later stage of the Semi-Sage Realm rushed towards Yi Shiwen. However, there was a large distance between them and Yi Shiwen. The White Dwarf had already dried up. However, it had still spread over 10,000 kilometers. In other words, these people were separately seated over 10,000 kilometers away from the center, since they were maintaining the matrix formation. They hadn't anticipated that they would come across a surprise attack. Yi Shiwen had already killed the people who were guarding this place. Therefore, nobody was alarmed when Yi Shiwen arrived. They had no way to catch Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered as he looked at young Master Feng and shouted, "Die!" Young Master Feng had planned to cause trouble for him after he had become a sage expert. The best approach was to root out the weed before it could spread. Yi Shiwen could kill him by taking the advantage of the fact that the other semi-sage experts would take time to arrive here. Even an expert of the later stage of the semi-sage realm would need a considerable amount of time to cover 10,000 kilometers. And Yi Shiwen could take the advantage of this time gap. Yi Shiwen shouted "Die!" and turned into a golden lightning. He then flew towards young Master Feng to kill him. Young Master Feng began to burn with anger after he realized that Yi Shiwen hadn't only snatched his inner core, but also wanted to kill him. He took a medicinal pill out of his spatial ring, and swallowed it. One could clearly see that the injuries on his entire body had been repaired quite quickly. It might be assumed that this was an extremely precious medicinal pill. An ordinary person would use one very carefully. They wouldn't consume without thinking about it first. They wouldn't dare to use it so extravagantly like he had. However, young Master Feng was facing a life-or-death situation. It was as fierce and violent as Yi Shiwen's golden dragon. However, this blood dragon was more ominous and evil-looking than a grandiose golden dragon. The blood dragon roared loudly. The sound's vibrations shook the entire universe. Its fierce claws ripped apart the vast space as it arrived beside young Master Feng and destroyed his defense. And then, it arrived in front of young Master Feng. Bang! Young Master Feng was sent flying in the space by the terrifying power of the blood dragon. His throat sustained injuries, and he spouted a mouthful of blood. He might not have cared about Yi Shiwen's attacks much. Indeed, it was being quite difficult for him to kill Yi Shiwen. However, he hadn't thought that Yi Shiwen would respond in this way. He couldn't underestimate the blood slave's attacks since it was at the late stage of the semi-sage realm, just like him. Moreover, he himself had merely condensed 700 Tao principles, while the blood slave had condensed 750. In short, it was a bit more tyrannical than him. He was still thinking about means to deal with these two when Yi Shiwen suddenly arrived in front of him. A Han seal pounded towards him above. Bang! Young Master Feng didn't get time to dodge, and the Han seal pounded on him. He once again spouted blood. His body went flying upside down in the space. Stop! Brat, you're courting death. Do you know who we are? You have committed a serious offense by offending our Feng clan. The people of our clan will wipe out your 9 generations. Those 4 experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm were dumbstruck as they witnessed this scene. The situation had undergone an incredible change in just a few moments. Young Master Feng wasn't weak. His strength wasn't just for show's sake. He was more powerful than any of them. However, he didn't have the power to fight back when he came under the attacks of these 2 strange individuals. He had been reduced to such a desperate state in a mere matter of a few rounds of fighting. This was impossible in their opinion. These people had reached the late stage of the semi-sage realm. They were only half a step away from entering the sage realm. They would then transcend their mortal lives. Therefore, they were well aware of the limitations of their own strength. They would believe if someone were to say that he could kill them. However, they couldn't accept the fact that someone could effortlessly beat them into a dead dog. The joint attack of a young expert of legendary realm and a strange red creature had forced young Master Feng into such a miserable state in a short period of time. They felt like they were witnessing a myth with their own eyes. To be continued. Chapter 411. There was a significant difference between Yi Shiwen's and young Master Feng's cultivation levels. They were in different realms, and their real strengths also differed by a bit. However, Yi Shiwen's gilded tyrant form had minimized these differences to a certain extent. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had also integrated the heavenly source mirror into his body now. So, his defense had increased considerably. It certainly wasn't an ordinary thing to have a sage tool protecting one's body. Now, he could allow the enemy's attacks to hit his body, and could use the opportunity to focus more on attacking. Indeed, it was quite difficult for an expert with the strength of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm to injure the expert of the late stage of semi-sage realm. However, how could Yi Shiwen be taken lightly? His one strike was equivalent to the combined attack of dozens of experts of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm. Even an expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm would have to avoid his strong attacks. Yi Shiwen's strength had increased by multiple times after the heavenly source mirror had upgraded to become a sage tool. In fact, experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm who only possessed 500 or 600 Tao principles had no means to deal with him. Even a semi-sage expert like young Master Feng with 700 Tao principles appeared like a helpless stray dog when faced with the joint attacks of Yi Shiwen and the blood slave. It's impossible! A look of panic appeared on young Master Feng's face. He unceasingly was stuffing medicines in his mouth. However, he was still being pushed back by the joint attacks of Yishiwen and Blood's slave. The Blood slave was the creation and puppet of Yishiwen. Naturally, their minds were interlinked. They had a tacit understanding, and were coordinating their attacks to perfection. Bang! 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 Young Master Feng had fallen into a disadvantageous position. He had turned into a sandbag under the combined attacks of Yishiwen and the Blood slave. He simply didn't have the means to resist their attacks. He couldn't even catch up with them. Yishiwen and the Blood slave were using devil wings, and their speed was extremely fast. The other old experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm saw young Master Feng being blown around like a sandbag between a golden light and a blood light. Stop! Those elders trembled with fear as they saw this scene. They were afraid that young Master Feng would get killed at this rate. That would be horrible. Bang! Young Master Feng was again sent flying by an attack. The bones throughout his body had been shattered after getting bombarded several times. It was a very tragic scene. An incomparably ominous look appeared on young Master Feng's face. His handsome face had been already beaten into a pig's. The grim look had distorted his face. Just you wait, I won't let you off! Young Master Feng roared. He wasn't going to give up. He clenched his teeth to demonstrate his anger. Then, he took out a scroll from his spatial ring, and crushed it to pieces. The scroll transformed into a pitch-black portal after getting crushed. It looked as if it was imitating the darkness of the void. A profound aura was wrapped around this huge portal. Young Master Feng flew into the portal without any delay. And the portal disappeared immediately after that. Yishiwen was taken aback. He hadn't expected that young Master Feng would possess a transmission portal. It wasn't surprising why that ominous and begrudged expression had appeared on his face. One must know that only the sage experts were capable of using their energy to split open a crack in the space. However, it would be a dead end for them if they were to rush inside it. Only the great sage experts were capable of establishing a transmission array formation for traveling from one point in space to another. In fact, such a thing could only be done by those great sage experts who possessed a good understanding regarding these transmission array formations. Moreover, tens of hundreds of experts would be required to form an array formation in order to travel longer distances. The space was an extremely mysterious thing for any individual. Even the peak-level expert of Great Sage Realm couldn't create a transmission scroll. Yishiwen didn't know how this young Master Feng had obtained this transmission scroll. However, the appearance of that begrudged expression on his face clearly indicated that he wasn't going to give up. He wouldn't have used such a precious item if his own life weren't in danger. Yishiwen didn't idle for another second. He collected the Blood slave, and left treading on the rainbow light. Those four old experts roared in anger, and rushed after him. Yishiwen's intention was very clear. He had succeeded in bullying a bully like young Master Feng with the help of the Blood slave. However, things would have become quite difficult for Yishiwen if those four old experts had interfered. Yishiwen was very fast. He quickly disappeared from their line of sight. And they could only curse him out of frustration since they didn't have any means to catch him. Yishiwen burst into laughter after he heard them curse behind his back. His mood became extremely jubilant. He was happy to have taught these guys a lesson, especially after they had openly threatened him by stating that they'd come after his life. He had also managed to steal the inner core of a star. He was certainly in a very good mood. He rushed towards the Wind Dragon City as per the directions he had seen in the star map. The Wind Dragon City was widely famous in the nearby regions. It was said that this city was built on the corpse of a huge wind dragon. However, this was just a rumor. Nobody knew whether it was true or false. This Wind Dragon City was established thousands of years ago. Its city lord had also been changed several times. The ordinary people didn't know much about the history of the city. They also didn't know what the situations had been at the time of this city's establishment. Yishiwen flew at a fast speed for one day, and eventually arrived at the Wind Dragon City. The Wind Dragon City appeared like a city that stood on a small island in the space. It appeared exceptionally special in this silent and dark universe. Yishiwen stopped to rest for a while. He saw several martial experts roaming about in the city. Many of these experts were at the legendary realm. However, the semi-sage experts were also present in abundance. Several such experts could be seen from time to time. Yishiwen could also spot disciples of the true martial university. Even disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall and other forces of the true martial world were present. Yishiwen contacted Hua Menghan immediately after he reached the Wind Dragon City. However, she was at the city central arena at this time. Yishiwen received Hua Menghan's message, and promptly rushed towards the city's central arena. This arena was very famous in the Wind Dragon City. People would often go to this arena to challenge the experts who arrived in this city from various places. The Wind Dragon City was merely one city. However, its citizens had come from the true martial world, and various other regions of the chaotic heavenly territory. It was a small city, but one could find all sorts of experts here. Therefore, experts would often emerge in this arena. Yishiwen hurriedly proceeded towards the arena. He saw two figures fighting in the arena. One among them was tall. He was approximately 30 years old. And the other one was a child. He was approximately 11 or 12 years old. This child's skin was as fair as snow. He appeared exceptionally adorable. However, his face was covered with a brutal expression. Yishiwen spotted Hua Menghan in the crowd. She wasn't far from him. Yishiwen promptly went towards her and greeted. "Sister Hua! Ah, you are here. Are you all right?" Hua Menghan asked, somewhat concerned. "Of course, I'm all right." Yishiwen told her everything about how he stole young Master Feng's star core. "Sister Hua, our cultivation will advance by leaps and bounds after we absorb the inner core. We will make huge progress." "Well, why have you come here?" Yishiwen asked, somewhat puzzled. However, he didn't wait for Hua Menghan's reply since the arena had suddenly undergone tremendous changes. That 30-year-old man retreated several steps after facing that child's attack. In fact, he couldn't find a foothold. Bang! A palm struck that man's chest. His ribs broke, and he was sent flying upside down. Yishiwen couldn't help but gasp. He could see that this child didn't belong to some dwarf race or anything. He was only an 11 or 12-year-old kid. However, he possessed shockingly tyrannical strength. That middle-aged man possessed the strength of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. However, he was no match for this kid. One palm attack of this kid had knocked him out of the arena. Yishiwen couldn't help but be shocked after he witnessed a young teenager demonstrate such tyrannical strength. This Peng Yangbo is extremely strong. Even a semi-sage realm expert has lost to him. He's far more than just strong. He's an evil genius. He's just 11 years old. These so-called geniuses should die with shame since they are all *T in front of this child prodigy. Anyone will die from anger and frustration if they compare themselves with him. How can there be such a peerless genius among so many geniuses that exist in this world? Yeah. No one can find Peng Yangbo's match among the younger generation disciples of Xianyuan Palace Hall. We can trace back to hundreds of thousands of years to make the comparison, but we still won't find someone as talented. He doesn't appear that incredible to me. I have heard that he had obtained a mysterious inheritance at a very young age. Otherwise, it is impossible to become so powerful so quick. Some people also say that he's the reincarnation of a great figure from ancient times. That's why he can cultivate so quickly. But he is a peerless disciple of this generation. Everyone's discussions reached Yishiwen's ears. He found out that this kid was a disciple of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. It could be said that the Xianyuan Palace Hall had picked up a gem this time. Peng Yangbo's face exposed a somewhat bitter expression. He shouted, "Is this the level of true martial university's disciples? How pathetic! I'm very disappointed. They are just trash, nothing else. Why hasn't that Yishiwen come out yet? I will wait for another 3 months in this arena. If someone knows him, then tell him that this young master has summoned him over for a fight. Just see how I blow him off to oblivion." Yi Shiwen finally understood why Hua Menghan had arrived here. This kid's hatred was actually directed towards Yi Shiwen. A bitter expression appeared on the faces of those surrounding disciples of the true martial university, as they heard Peng Yangbo's words. Several disciples of the true martial university were present in the arena. They obviously felt very agitated upon hearing these words. Several disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall were also present here. They simultaneously clamored on the contrary. Tell that Yi Shiwen to come out. That's if he has the guts to take on this challenge. Yi Shiwen figured that the disciples who belonged to different forces hadn't begun to establish contacts with each other yet. So, his name mustn't have reached Xianyuan Palace Hall. And these disciples of Xianyuan Palace were clearly hostile towards him. This must be because he had killed Fan Ming. That fight between Yi Shiwen and Fan Ming could be regarded as the collision between the top disciples of the younger generation of the true martial university and the Xianyuan Palace Hall. And Yi Shiwen had killed Fan Ming in the end. The Xianyuan Palace Hall's people certainly weren't willing to accept this. To be continued. Chapter 412. Not many forces of the true martial world could be placed at the same level as the true martial university. However, some could be. And a majority of these forces had immense and deep-seated hatred toward the true martial university. They didn't get along with each other. In fact, each force would look for every possible method to weaken the strength of the other forces. There was huge conflict between the true martial university and the Xianyuan Palace Hall in particular. It couldn't have been bigger than it already was. The true martial university had dominance over the southern region. Many forces were jealous because of this. The Xianyuan Palace Hall was a force of the Central Plains, and was located south of Yellow River. They were in close proximity, and this had made them hostile towards the true martial university. The disciples of these two forces were more hostile towards each other than they were towards the disciples from other regions. Yi Shiwen's name had begun to spread inside the Xianyuan Palace Hall after he had killed Fan Ming. The competition in the Xianyuan Palace Hall was also very intense, just like true martial university. Countless people would attentively watch the state of competitions among the Heaven's Pride level experts. Fan Ming's sudden death had come as a big shock. This had caused a huge sensation in the Xianyuan Palace Hall. However, the Xianyuan Palace Hall didn't pay much attention to this matter since they couldn't rise and revolt against the true martial university. It seemed as if this matter had been left unsettled. However, Yi Shiwen had become very famous in the Xianyuan Palace Hall. Each disciple of the Xianyuan Palace Hall had come to know that Yi Shiwen had killed one of their Heaven's Pride level experts. Consequently, they began to look for him to cause trouble. Several Heaven's Pride level experts of the Xianyuan Palace Hall hadn't yet competed against one another. Therefore, it was difficult to decide who was stronger and who was weaker. However, since Yi Shiwen had killed Fan Ming, so one wouldn't have to do anything else to prove that they were the best among all Heaven's Pride level experts if they could defeat or kill Yi Shiwen. Wouldn't they become famous very quickly? Yi Shiwen decided to pass through this crucial situation. And it was somewhat indeed a strange one. However, it did make some sense as to why they would aim for him. This situation was very similar to the one that had arisen after he had killed the second god. Many people had come to believe that he was the top expert in the younger generation. This child is hateful. Hua Menghan had become somewhat angry. Her beautiful face had turned slightly red because of anger. Yi Shiwen smiled and said, "I can handle him. Be careful. He's extremely arrogant, but he doesn't seem ordinary." Hua Menghan whispered to him. "Yeah." Yi Shiwen nodded. He looked calm. However, he wouldn't underestimate this child either. No, it wasn't a joke for him. How could he look down on an 11 or 12 years old child who had such cultivation? It was enough to make other Heaven's Pride level experts die with shame. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't dejected by this. His own cultivation speed wasn't slower than this child's. This road was very long, and this was just a beginning, nothing more. It was just a short-lived fad, nothing more. Only the most talented person would have the final laugh. It seems that the true Martial University's disciples are trash. Peng Yangbo laughed coldly. His small face was covered with a disdainful expression. Yi Shiwen slowly walked out of the crowd and stepped into the arena. He said, "Even a child can become famous when there are no heroes around. A brat like you who hasn't even grown hair down there should first learn how to fight and kill." Ha 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 ha! Ha ha ha! Several experts burst into laughter after they listened to Yi Shiwen's words. Many people among these experts hated this arrogant Peng Yangbo. No one's ever fond of an arrogant person. However, they didn't dare to provoke him. This child had slapped several experts of the semi-sage realm a moment ago, and had sent them flying. They were no match for him. However, those experts couldn't control themselves, and burst into laughter after they saw someone daring to provoke him. An incomparably bitter look appeared in the eyes of the disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. Peng Yangbo's age was his highlight, as well as his most vulnerable spot. And Yi Shiwen had poked him where it hurts the most. "Who are you?" Yi Shiwen's words had made Peng Yangbo's small face turn deep red. He was extremely furious. He would get enraged whenever someone talked about his age. "I'm Yi Shiwen." Yi Shiwen smiled indifferently and said, "I wouldn't have bothered to haggle with a child. But I'm not so heartless as to see a child wait for 3 months in the arena. So I came out. Do you wish to die?" Peng Yangbo's complexion had turned gloomy and ugly. It seemed if he would start crying any moment now. Yi Shiwen had already poked his sensitive spot twice or thrice. "Oh ho, you also have a bit of bad temper." Yi Shiwen laughed out loud and said, "But even your anger is as half-assed as a child's." "Shut up. I only had the intention to suppress you in order to show you your place. But now, your death is certain," Peng Yangbo stated. He had clearly been enraged out of shame. "You wish to suppress me? Forget about it, brat. Why don't you first grow some hair down there?" Yi Shiwen laughed mischievously. He was deliberately saying such poisonous words. Everyone laughed. Hua Menghan also smiled a little. Her delicate body shook gently. She had never seen Yi Shiwen smile so mischievously, or use such poisonous words at someone. "Damn it! You have made me very angry today. You will certainly die." Peng Yangbo's complexion turned ashen. It seemed as if tears would roll down from his eyes any moment now. He thundered and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if his anger would pierce through the space. His tyrannical strength left everyone to tremble with fear. Yi Shiwen had poked him again and again. This had made him lose face in front of everyone. He began to knead a seal technique with his hands. It produced a lightning which seemingly split open the entire world. It illuminated the void, and swept towards Yi Shiwen to chop him down. This is the magical power of a supreme thunder technique. It seems that this Peng Yangbo has obtained a wonderful book, 9 Temples 5 Elements Thunder Book. It is the most exquisite thunder technique. Some people even say that he's the reincarnation of the thunder god. I've heard this rumor too. This 11-year-old semi-sage expert is truly astounding. It has also been said that he possesses the extraordinary blood of the chaotic heaven thunder body. This means that he must have reaped exceptional benefits by practicing his own thunder cultivation method. Not to mention that 9 Temples 5 Elements Thunder Book would enhance his power even further. An average person can't match him. I say his insane progress speed is strange. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted. His hands got covered with golden divinities. He didn't dodge or avoid. He charged towards the incoming lightning, and grabbed them. Other people would have been very scared of such a thunder technique. However, it was nothing in front of Yi Shiwen, since he had used the lightning energy of heterogeneous heavenly tribulations to temper his body. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen's palm exploded those lightning. And the terrifying force from his hands swept out energy storms everywhere. The lightning attack was straightaway crushed by Yi Shiwen. It couldn't pose any threat to him. Someone immediately opened his mouth in shock after he saw Yi Shiwen fight in such a relaxed manner. He said, "So this is Yi Shiwen? He's really outstanding. He just used his bare hands to tackle Pang Yangbo's lightning attack. His body is insanely tough." That's true. One of the earlier opponents didn't even get the time to evade the attack. His flesh had been lacerated, and his blood had splashed out as a result. There seems like a huge difference of power between these two. That's not true. An informed disciple of the true martial university spoke up somewhat proudly. That Pang Yangbo isn't an ordinary person. Our Yi Shiwen isn't an ordinary person either. He has the strongest body in our true martial university. Even the famous Titan body lost and died in his hands. His body is invincible. Nobody can stand in front of him. Titan body suffered a major defeat and got killed in the end. But he was very powerful. After all, he was of a rare bloodline, and had the invincible body of a Titan. However, he still turned out to be inferior to Yi Shiwen. I must say that this Yi Shiwen is unbearably strong. This child is extremely arrogant. He has provoked Yi Shiwen. He will soon start to cry once he realizes that he has messed with the wrong guy. Ha ha ha! That disciple of the true martial university burst into laughter after he was done talking. He was no longer sour about his earlier defeat at the hands of Pang Yangbo. He can only deal with an invincible expert like Yi Shiwen if he can suppress him with some supreme magical powers. Otherwise, he doesn't stand a chance. Pang Yangbo became even angrier after he saw that Yi Shiwen had effortlessly destroyed his offensive. He knew that Yi Shiwen wasn't an ordinary person. After all, Fan Ming had lost and died in his hands. So he couldn't possibly be an ordinary guy. However, Pang Yangbo still looked down on Yi Shiwen. The experts like this child felt like the whole world was in their palms since they had remained at the peak for a long time. Hence, they could be called extremely arrogant and lawless. What authority? What reputation? Everything was bullshit. Only one's fist was the strongest. A majority of so-called Heaven's Pride level experts used to think like this. Pang Yangbo's countenance had turned even colder. An endless amount of lightning was boiling and surging on his body. It seemed as if he was attracting the wandering lightning like a conductor. The thunder and lightning were objects most people always maintained a respectful distance from. However, they appeared obedient and docile in his hands. Numerous seals dazzled in his hands. Countless thunders and lightning condensed into dozens of giant thunder dragons as per his will. Then, those giant dragons started to roar in anger. The surrounding space shook. The claws of these dragons could grab and explode the space. They were exceptionally terrifying. The onlookers were left in shock by this spectacle. Nobody had thought that Pang Yangbo could be this strong. Each of these dragons could be compared with an expert of the semi-sage realm. However, dozens of such thunder dragons had conveniently condensed at his will. None of his previous opponents had been able to force him to display his true strength. However, he had displayed the extent of his strength in this battle. His tyrannical strength had left everyone in shock. Yi Shiwen was also somewhat dumbstruck. It wasn't difficult to practice till the intermediate stage if one had talent. But one might not become a Heaven's Pride level expert even though they had practiced till the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. In fact, many experts of the younger generation had practiced till the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. However, there were only a few Heaven's Pride level experts. The reason was quite simple. It was because of the disparity in their strengths. One Heaven's Pride level expert could easily beat dozens of experts of the same realm. Heaven's Pride level experts could stand tall against all the other top experts of the same realm. These were the traits of a real Heaven's Pride level expert. Pang Yangbo was very young. However, he was truly an evil genius since he had displayed such strength. Moreover, his chaotic heaven thunder body was really outstanding. These thunder dragons simultaneously revealed their ferocious features. They soared up and fluttered around in the space. The massive thunder dragons gathered around Yi Shiwen and surrounded him. Then, they swept down towards Yi Shiwen. Each of these dragons was exceptionally scary. Yishuan snorted and rushed forward like a ferocious beast. To be continued. Chapter 413. Yishuan's glowing golden hands emitted waves of golden light. It ripped apart the space, and advanced ahead. Suddenly, one of the thunder dragons opened its big mouth, and rushed towards Yishuan to bite him. Yishuan's big hand grabbed and then pinched the neck of that thunder dragon. Its neck instantly snapped. Its body transformed into a bundle of energy, and this energy was then absorbed by Yishuan. Humph! Babies shouldn't act so arrogantly, Yishuan sneered. Then, he straightaway dashed into that group of thunder dragons. Peng Yangbo is indeed outstanding. But it's not easy to deal with Yishuan either. The rumors say that Yishuan has killed a Heaven's Pride level expert of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. This has attracted the attentions of many of their people towards him. It's not surprising why the Xianyuan Palace Hall has suddenly gone bonkers to take Yishuan down. It's far from being just crazy. The Xianyuan Palace Hall and the true Martial University aren't on friendly terms. These two wouldn't have acted kindly towards each other even without this underlying matter. Both of these individuals are extremely ferocious. An ordinary semi-sage expert can't even withstand a move from these two. He'd get blown away by their attack. Peng Yangbo can be regarded as an evil genius at such a young age. Nobody will be able to dominate him when he matures. Even that Yishuan, who is said to have killed 2 Heaven's Pride level experts already, may not stand a chance. Those thunder dragons swept down towards Yishuan like huge mountains to crush him. The space crumbled wherever they went. However, Yishuan dashed straight into them without caring about anything. Bang! Yishuan's one kick exploded a thunder dragon. An ordinary expert of the late stage of semi-sage realm would have regretted facing these thunder dragons head-on. However, Yishuan was treating them as if they were no big deal. Bang! 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 Each time a dragon got slayed by Yishuan, it was accompanied by the loud sound of an explosion. Yishuan gradually began to comprehend the so-called Dragon Slayer technique as he killed more and more thunder dragons. It was a supreme and terrifying secret technique. Its brilliance used to prevail in the ancient world. However, this secret technique had eventually drowned in the river of time, and had completely vanished. Humph! Yishuan, nobody will be able to save you today! Peng Yangbo shouted. Then, he also broke into the group of thunder dragons. He held a thunder blade. This blade had a purple glow to it. The surrounding air diffused as he brandished his thunder blade. The space got shattered into small pieces. The thunder blade fell towards Yishuan's head. This was a fierce and ruthless attack. This child was arrogant. Nobody had ever humiliated him like this. So, he wanted to use Yishuan's blood to wash off his shame. Clang! It sounded as if 2 metals had collided. Yishuan's sword intention had rushed up from his hand, and had welcomed Peng Yangbo's attack. Bang! Yishuan's long sword swept down, and beheaded a thunder dragon. It might have been the most rampant type of dragon in the world. However, it appeared like a docile sheep in front of Yishuan. He continued to kill the thunder dragons one by one without facing any difficulty. Rumble! The long sword and the thunder blade collided ferociously in the void. A terrifying force swept out from the center of the collision, and shattered the entire space around the arena. A horrific storm swept across and obstructed everyone's vision. Bang! The loud scream of a young voice sounded, and a figure went flying upside down from inside the storm. Everyone looked attentively. It turned out to be Peng Yangbo. His young figure went flying up in the space with blood gushing out from his body. He had been sent flying by Yishuan's mighty strength. The storm dispersed. Yishuan stood in the center like an ancient god. A chill ran inside everyone. The truth of Yishuan's incredible body had appeared before the people of the Wind Dragon City for the first time. It was just as the rumors had stated. One could only defeat Yishuan by suppressing him with the help of some supreme magical power. Otherwise, fighting against his body was next to courting death. Even the Titan body didn't turn out to be his match. Yi Shiwen had killed him after he had scared him to the point of madness. Yi Shiwen brandished his sword again, and it killed several thunder dragons which were wandering about in a group. Then, a Han seal appeared above. A huge seal, made up entirely of stone, swept down from above like a huge mountain. Bang! Peng Yangbo was still flying in midair, but the Han seal caught up with him. It smashed down on his chest, and broke quite a few ribs. Then, he was pounded into the arena's floor. The impact formed a giant hole in the extremely hard floor of the arena. Peng Yangbo had been smashed into the arena. This had splattered the dust and gravels everywhere. The flow of battle had changed enormously. Everyone was dumbstruck at this sight. They hadn't anticipated that Peng Yangbo would be smashed into the arena by a seal technique. However, mere one mistake in his decision had given Yi Shiwen an opportunity to display a brilliant counterattack. No, this couldn't even be regarded as a mistake on Peng Yangbo's part. An average person wouldn't have been able to deal with Peng Yangbo's surprise attack. However, it was his misfortune that Yi Shiwen was his opponent. He was far inferior to Yi Shiwen, whether it was in fighting strength or the toughness of his body. Yi Shiwen! Peng Yangbo roared. A horrifying power surged out from his body, and began to boil around him. Even his appearance had changed significantly. He no longer looked like a well-dressed youngster. Instead, he looked exceptionally miserable. His eyes had turned bloodshot. It seemed as if he was dying to kill Yi Shiwen, and would separate his bones from his muscles. His ominous facial expression frightened many people. One must know that this child wasn't internally the same as he appeared on the surface. He had never suffered such a defeat in his whole life. In fact, he had always bullied other people. How could have other people bullied him? His innate talent was on a whole different level. His cultivation speed was extremely quick. He had voyaged a pleasant journey thus far. He had obtained everything he had ever desired for. However, this time he had been defeated by Yi Shiwen, and this had shattered his ego. His frustration had transformed into anger, and it seemed as if his rage would burn the heaven itself. A thunder dragon came out of his body. It roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Its long tail opened a huge crack in the arena. Yi Shiwen saw that thunder dragon coming towards him. He snorted and said, "It's best for a child to be obedient and stay at home." An endless amount of golden light emerged from Yi Shiwen's hand. Then, this golden light went up to grab that thunder dragon. Bang! That thunder dragon's head was caught and crushed by Yi Shiwen's golden claw. The dragon transformed into a mass of energy, and was then absorbed by Yi Shiwen. It might have seemed like an extremely terrifying entity to the others. However, it was nothing in Yi Shiwen's eyes. After all, his gilded tyrant form had been gradually tempered by the heavenly tribulations. Yi Shiwen could casually walk into the group of thunder dragons, and could butcher them one by one with grace. Yi Shiwen suddenly heard Peng Yangbo's ferocious voice as soon as he killed this thunder dragon. "Yi Shiwen, die!" This immature voice was filled with bitter resentment. Yi Shiwen turned around, and saw that Peng Yangbo was condensing a secret seal technique in his hands at a very fast speed. He was concentrating the endless power of thunder and lightning in the middle of the arena. An extremely tall figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes. He appeared like an ancient god, and his entire body was brimming with lightning. It seemed as if he had been born in a sea of thunder and lightning. The thunder and lightning were at his beck and call. The endless power of thunder and lightning was being unleashed with each step which he took. He was spouting an overwhelming and godly power. This is Thunder God. This supreme magical power has been mentioned in the 9 Temples 5 Elements Thunder Book. It has been mentioned in the folklores that one can summon the Thunder God. I didn't expect that Peng Yangbo would have comprehended the 9 Temples 5 Elements Thunder Book to such extent at such a young age. This book has fallen into his hands, and has made him even more powerful. A knowledgeable expert recognized it, and spoke in astonishment. That's not right. It's not the real Thunder God. However, it's still quite dreadful. The Thunder God was one of the most terrifying gods in the ancient times. Yishuan looked calm, but a solemn look had appeared on his face. He could feel an unprecedented suppression emerging from the phantom of the Thunder God. One must know that the Das practiced by everyone had basically been established by 300 chaotic devil gods in the ancient times. These were known as 3,000 main Das. And they eventually led one to the invincible Tao. Therefore, there were many power techniques, which when practiced to the peak, would allow the practitioner to summon the associated chaotic devil god. These techniques were considered ultimate because the original chaotic devil gods used to be powerful enough to deter the 10,000 worlds in the ancient times. They used to be extremely terrifying. The chaotic devil gods would have conquered the 10,000 worlds if they hadn't fallen in the ancient past. This secret technique basically allowed one to condense the spirit, essence, and energy of a particular devil god. The phantom condensed would be extremely tyrannical even if it contained only a wisp of the original. The Thunder God used to be ranked near the top among the many devil gods. The Thunder God's thunder principle was considered unparalleled and incredible. Rumble. The Thunder God grew bigger and bigger in front of everyone. It grew more than 100 feet tall. It looked a bit blurred and unclear. However, it possessed a kind of incredible majesty. It held a thunder blade in its hand. Endless thunder and lightning condensed together, and swept down towards Yishuan. It seemed like a mighty torrent of endless thunder and lightning had poured down. Yishuan's left hand condensed a startling sword intention. He immediately swept out the buried earth sword technique. He simultaneously used his right hand to brandish the coiling dragon palm. He used the move Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss. His right palm gave birth to a giant golden dragon. It roared and rushed up. Yishuan had promptly exhibited two secret techniques, and had unleashed them thoroughly. Yishuan's aura became exceptionally terrifying. This left everyone in astonishment. Bang! The two terrifying forces collided into each other. That ancient thunder god's offensive was successfully blocked. Both of Yishuan's secret techniques had collaborated to fight against the lone thunder god. Rumble. A dreadful power swept across. The surrounding space could have withstood it, and collapsed. To be continued. Chapter 414. Thunder and lightning tumbled and rolled in the arena. However, it was blocked from going outside the arena by the barrier. The Thunder God's phantom was brimming with divine power. However, Yishuan's complexion remained unchanged. Yishuan, you will die today! Peng Yangbo's immature voice was filled with chill. It could scare people. His countenance had turned fierce and distorted. He advanced towards Yishuan step by step. Weren't you famous for your invincible body? I will crush your body. The Thunder God's phantom also followed him step by step. The pressure it exerted on Yishuan also increased bit by bit. You will crush me? Someone like you thinks he can do that alone? I will slowly drag you to death. Yishuan faintly laughed and spoke. He clearly wasn't taking the kid seriously. It would be impossible for Peng Yangbo to keep such a big move activated for a long time. Otherwise, he could have become invincible in this region. However, Yishuan wasn't planning to wait until Peng Yangbo had exhausted his real elemental energy. That would be too boring. He would rather defeat him in his most peak time. He could shatter his pride that way. Moreover, he could break his confidence, and also destroy his Tao. This would be a lot better than just killing him. Yishuan's golden divinity surged up, and began to revolve around his body. He was brimming with self-confidence. Peng Yangbo could be his match if and only if he had already made a breakthrough into the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, he didn't stand a chance against Yishuan. Peng Yangbo took out a tiny purple-colored dan. It was as small as a melon seed. Yet, a terrifying power was overflowing from it. Crap! That's a thunder seed! Yishuan heard Yimo's panting voice in his mind. How has this child obtained such an item? Yemo explained, and Yishuan came to know that a thunder seed was an extremely rare item. Even the unceasing refining and condensing of lightning energy could only make a small amount of this seed. Moreover, a human being simply couldn't make it. So, he must have obtained this item as an inheritance. The surrounding area immediately transformed into an ocean of thunder and lightning after Pang Yang Bo swallowed the thunder seed. A seemingly endless amount of densely packed thunder and lightning flooded the entire arena. Yi Xuan's entire body was also covered by thunder and lightning. The endless thunder and lightning whipped Yi Xuan's body like a divine whip. The height of the thunder god's phantom increased another 100 feet before Yi Xuan. It seemed as if the thunder god had received a huge stimulus, and had solidified even further. He rushed towards Yi Xuan to kill him. The onlookers couldn't clearly see what was happening in the arena. The lightning had obstructed their vision. They didn't know what Pang Yang Bo had swallowed. However, they knew that it must be an incredible thing that went against the heaven's will. He was willing to sacrifice anything in order to kill Yi Xuan. How much hatred did he possess for Yi Xuan? Is this your strongest attack? Watch how I destroy you along with your attack! Yi Xuan's ice-cold voice sounded from the sea of lightning. Bang! 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 A terrifying explosion occurred within the arena that was shrouded by that ocean of lightning. Intermittent waves of a dreadful energy storm swept out. These energy waves would sweep clear the lightning from time to time. Therefore, everyone would be able to see what was happening in the arena from time to time. However, the time period for which they could see the arena was too short. So, they only saw two figures fight. They could only see a purple and a golden figure fighting in midair. Yi Xuan was fighting that thunder god's phantom unarmed. He wasn't afraid of it. Moreover, he wasn't even falling into a disadvantageous situation. Clang! The loud sound of a sword being unsheathed resounded, and an extremely terrifying sword intention was swept out. It began to overflow throughout the arena, and overwhelmed the spectators. It didn't pass through the barrier of the arena, but the spectators could still feel its sharpness on their faces. It seemed as if it would behead them any moment now. Buried person's sword! Buried earth's sword! Buried heaven's sword! The clanging sounds of the collision of metals echoed more and more intensely. The sword energy became even more aggressive. The sounds of Pan Yang Bo's angry roars were also mixed among these clanging sounds. Bang! A startling sword intention condensed in the void. Then, it further condensed into an extremely long sword, a sword so long that it extended as far as the eye could see. It was several 100 feet long. Then, it charged into the lightning to kill that fuzzy purple-colored phantom. Rumble! A rumbling sound echoed throughout the arena. The arena was shattered into small pieces under the impact of this sword intention. Everyone was dumbstruck. One must know that this arena was made of extremely hard materials. A battle between semi-sage experts couldn't break it. However, Yi Xuan's sword attack had done it in an instant. This was unprecedented. The lightning quickly dispersed after this attack, and a young figure was sent flying. He readily spouted blood. His blood contained traces of the power of thunder and lightning. He ferociously collided with the pillar of the arena, and it broke. However, this had stopped the enormous force with which he was sent flying. That extremely huge sword had nailed down the incomparably huge thunder god's phantom to the floor in the center of the arena. The terrifying power of this sword attack had even split the entire arena into two halves. One could only imagine that kind of strength. The thunder god was groaning and moaning with pain under the suppression of the huge sword. The purple-colored lightning was gushing out of his body like blood. Everyone was stunned as they saw this scene. Could this be considered as slaying a god? Everyone was aware that this was only the phantom of the thunder god. It was just a phantom, but it was still incomparably tyrannical. Nobody could contend against it, even if they were on the same level as it. However, Yi Xuan had nailed the thunder god's phantom to the ground. And the phantom was groaning with pain. This scene had subverted the spectators' sense of perception, and had made them accept that this was true God's slaying. Even their perception of reality had been subverted. They felt that there was no difference between this and God's slaying. Yi Shiwen stood on the hilt of the long sword that had left the Thunder God's phantom to groan. Everyone jostled to see this incredible scene up front. Hua Menghan was present in the crowd. Her face exposed a faint smile. However, her eyes appeared somewhat blurred. How is it possible? This can't be happening. Peng Yangbo's small face was covered with disbelief. He was very young, but he had reached here by defeating all his opponents. He had been always questioned because of his young age. So, he felt extremely annoyed whenever other people talked about his age. And Yi Shiwen had poked his weak spot a moment ago. This had made him extremely furious. However, nobody had been able to force him to summon the phantom of the Thunder God in the last few years of his expedition to become the strongest. The prospect of defeating the summoned Thunder God was obviously out of question. However, his Thunder God had been nailed down to the ground, and was left to groan with pain. He had always believed that he was invincible. However, Yi Shiwen had broken his unyielding confidence. So, he was forced to accept the fact that he wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen even though he had summoned the Thunder God. Why did it have to happen like this? How can this be? Didn't they say that I am the #1 genius of all times? I should be invincible. Reaching the Great Sage realm should have been a piece of cake for me. Peng Yangbo had nearly succumbed to madness. The stronger one is, the tougher it gets to change one's belief and accept the truth. He had believed in himself very firmly. And this belief is the driving force that lets one advance forward in most cases. However, this belief itself transforms into the biggest obstacle once one comes across a major setback. Then, this belief is what bars one from advancing further. #1 genius of all times? Yi Shiwen smiled as the corners of his mouth curled up. Peng Yangbo had been literally praised to the skies. Several incredible experts had appeared in this world. However, none of them had dared to say that they were the #1 genius. The Thunder God's phantom couldn't endure Yi Shiwen's suppression any longer. So, it dissipated into particles, and these particles were then swept away by the wind. The long sword disappeared from under Yi Shiwen's feet, and he calmly landed on the ground. He shot a glance at Peng Yangbo. Then, he turned around and began to walk out of the arena. He no longer paid any attention to Peng Yangbo. Several disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall were present in the surroundings, and they couldn't help but stare at Yi Shiwen. However, they didn't dare to stop him. This fight hadn't only quenched Peng Yangbo's arrogance, but it had also quenched the arrogance of those disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. 2 Heaven's Pride level experts of the Xianyuan Palace had been defeated by Yi Shiwen. Therefore, the Xianyuan Palace Hall's esteem would remain under the true martial universities as long as Yi Shiwen remained undefeated. On the other hand, the faces of the disciples of the true martial university exposed a proud expression. The last 1 month had been extremely suffocating for them. Peng Yangbo had constantly looked down on the true martial university. His intention was indeed to bring Yi Shiwen here. However, they still hadn't been able to get over that humiliation. They weren't Peng Yangbo's opponents. So, they had to face miserable defeats whenever they had dared to challenge him. However, Yi Shiwen had beaten Peng Yangbo as if he was teaching a lesson to a child. This had made them feel exceptionally comfortable. Yi Shiwen's name resounded throughout the Wind Dragon City for the first time. He had gained importance in the eyes of all the forces that were present in the city. You taught him a good lesson this time. Hua Menghan faintly smiled and said. Most of her anger also vanished after Yi Shiwen taught a ferocious lesson to Peng Yangbo. A child mustn't be so arrogant. Yi Shiwen exposed a faint smile. He didn't wish to kill Peng Yangbo. The second god's case was different. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have any reason to kill Peng Yangbo. And most importantly, Yi Shiwen had also felt the divine sense of a sage expert floating in the surrounding. It was a sage expert of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. He had been watching this fight attentively. He wouldn't have allowed Yi Shiwen to kill Peng Yangbo, not in a place like this at least. There was a complex and interlinked structure of forces in a place like the Wind Dragon City. Several forces of the true martial world were present here. Hence, the power structure was quite complicated. They would often make covert moves. In fact, they'd even fight in the open at times. Yishiwen was being cautious since several forces were active here. He had decided against giving some force a chance to annex him in order to maintain the fragile balance of power in the Wind Dragon City. Otherwise, considering the prowess of this city, any of the forces could annex him if given a chance, whether it was the true Martial University, the Xianyuan Palace Hall, or some other force. That sage expert of the Xianyuan Palace Hall must have established his presence among the experts of the Wind Dragon City. So, he wouldn't have watched as Peng Yangbo was being killed. He had been watching quietly till now because it was only a fight. However, he wouldn't have waited on the sidelines with folded arms if it had become a fight to the death. Similarly, the experts of the true Martial University wouldn't have watched with folded arms if Yishiwen's life was in danger. To be continued. Chapter 415. Heaven's Pride level experts were exceptionally rare for any force. They were considered as treasures. These forces wouldn't let them die under any circumstances. Yishiwen could certainly enjoy such treatment as well. Sister, I have snatched the inner core from that young master foam. We can easily make a breakthrough into the next realm if we absorb it. Yishiwen spoke up. They immediately left for the inn where Hua Menghan had been staying all this while. They were far more secure inside the city than outside. They didn't waste any time, and immediately began to absorb the White Dwarf's inner core. Time began to pass second by second while they absorbed the inner core. Time passed day by day, and an astonishing rumor began to spread in the Wind Dragon City. It was a well-known legend that the Wind Dragon City was established on the corpse of a giant wind dragon. However, this was only a rumor, nothing more. Nobody was sure about it. Everyone had slowly become used to it since it had been around for countless years. However, this legend and the rumor were closely related. An astonishing rumor had spread around this time. It said that the Wind Dragon City was genuinely built on the corpse of a wind dragon. It was obviously just a rumor, nothing else. After all, couldn't one confirm it by merely digging a 3 feet deep hole in the ground? However, the genuinely amazing thing was that it was said that there was a lair of a wind dragon not very far from the Wind Dragon City. However, this lair would shift to different spaces with time. So, it was very difficult to find it. But some great calculations had been made, and it was anticipated that this lair would soon be born in this space. This rumor had excited countless people in the Wind Dragon City. There were many rumors about the dragon race. In fact, nobody could tell the exact number of these rumors. However, this one couldn't be ignored. The dragon race was fond of collecting all kinds of treasures. And this wind dragon was already dead. But it must have left behind its treasures. How could this not have made everyone excited? People would advance by leaps and bounds if they could obtain some of these treasures. This rumor was getting more and more intense with each passing day. In fact, accurate coordinates had begun to come out as well. This had increased everyone's excitement about the matter. All kinds of large and small forces from various regions had hurried into the Wind Dragon City in order to get their slice of the profit. Moreover, human beings weren't the only ones. Even the star beasts that lived in the space and other regions' demon beasts had also rushed over. Many sage-level star beasts and demon beasts had attacked the Wind Dragon City in the last 6 months. The human experts were certainly interested in these treasures. However, those sage-level star beasts and demon beasts had also shown keen interest in the treasures of the Wind Dragon. The appearances of these star beasts and demon beasts wouldn't change much after they entered the sage realm. However, their wisdom was no longer inferior to that of humans. Moreover, many of these star beasts and demon beasts had lived for thousands of years. So, they were old and wise. An average person didn't stand a chance against them when it came to schemes and tricks. Human experts could advance by leaps and bounds after they had obtained this treasure. Similarly, these star beasts and demon beasts would benefit a lot if they could obtain this treasure. People would always go after the treasure trove of dragons. This was a historically proven fact. This dragon had surpassed the great sage realm during the course of its life. Therefore, the items it had left behind would be extremely precious. The city lord had dispatched troops to repel the invasion of these star beasts and demon beasts. Soon, half a year had already passed amidst these circumstances. Yi Shiwen was sitting cross-legged on a bed. He hadn't moved in these last 6 months. The energy within that inner core had continued to flow into Yi Shiwen's and Hua Menghan's body at a steady pace. Yi Shiwen had steadily absorbed the star power present inside the core. He had absorbed it continuously for half a year. So, the size of his universe had also increased significantly. It had almost expanded to become twice as large. The sun inside his universe glittered even more brightly. It was illuminating the entire universe. It seemed as if it was the only star present in his universe. Neptune was also gradually forming inside Yi Shiwen's universe. His martial power had seen an unceasing promotion. But the formation of Neptune had also neared its completion. In fact, it was only one step away from taking complete shape. The scorching energy was unceasingly entering Yi Shiwen's body. This energy wasn't a problem for Hua Menghan. Her heavenly phoenix body possessed exceptional acceptance ability towards this energy. It wasn't a big problem for Yi Shiwen either. His gilded tyrant form and his meridians had been exercised to a very high extent. An average person would have burnt down and turned to ashes if he were in Yi Shiwen's place. The unceasing absorption of this energy for half a year had resulted in the formation of its own principles. Yi Shiwen's Tao principles had reached 499. It could reach up to 500 Tao principles in just one step. This was a huge watershed. He would become comparable with the experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm after he had crossed this step. A look into the situation inside Yi Shiwen's body could terrify anyone since the principles within his body had become exceptionally thick. They were nearly 20 or more times thicker than those found in the body of an ordinary semi-sage expert. An average person's body would have exploded by now. Only Yi Shiwen could hold it. This was the advantage of having a tyrannical body. Yi Shiwen's accumulation had already reached a terrifying level. It had become even more profound than those old experts of the Legendary's great complete realm who had accumulated energy for hundreds of years. He had already reached a big crucial point. He could enter the semi-sage realm after he'd crossed this point. He would truly transcend from the legendary realm after he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. He could then begin to stride towards the sage realm. He would only surmount the half-step legendary realm in this process. However, he would no longer be comparable with his old self after that. Moreover, he would completely detach himself from the binds and limitation of half-step legendary realm after he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. His lifespan would increase to 1,000 years in one fell swoop. And it would increase even further after he had stepped into the sage realm. This was the advantage of being well prepared. Yi Shiwen felt as if his lifespan might increase endlessly to an unspecified period. The first step of becoming a sage would be completed after he had crossed this step. However, he would be stuck here for a lifetime if he couldn't complete this step. This wasn't a rare thing. Several experts of Legendary's great complete realm had remained stuck at this step. And they had never made it through in their lifetime. Of course, nobody had heard that any experts of the half-step Legendary's great complete realm had gotten stuck at this barrier. However, Yi Shiwen still didn't wish to take any chance. He had absorbed the required amount of energy from the inner core in this half a year's time. So, it was the time to cross this threshold. The stars inside Yi Shiwen's body began to revolve while he operated the observing person scripture. The star power got condensed little by little, and attacked the inner barrier of Yi Shiwen's realm. This barrier to the semi-sage realm had been eroded unceasingly like a dam in the last half a year's time. So, it was already heavily damaged. Yi Shiwen was focused. He didn't need to worry about the sudden arrival of the heavenly tribulation this time. It would be unique this time since the heavenly tribulation wouldn't arrive. This was because he had detached himself from the half-step legendary earlier, and had comprehended the principles of the semi-sage realm. So, the heavenly tribulation would arrive again when he'd enter the sage realm. In fact, Yishiwen would have chosen a desolate place to cross the heavenly tribulation if this wasn't the case. It would have been extremely conspicuous if he had chosen to cross the tribulation inside the Wind Dragon City. People had forgotten about him in last 6 months after great difficulties. And that too because the matter of the Wind Dragon's lair had suddenly come to light. He didn't wish to attract people's attention again. The barrier had indeed been damaged rather heavily by now. However, it was still difficult for Yishiwen to cross this natural moat. Bang! Yishiwen's entire body's power condensed into one mass and began to bombard the barrier in order to cross it. A long time passed. Yishiwen heaved a sigh. However, his facial expressions conveyed that he hadn't relaxed yet. He had failed, but he wasn't dejected. So, he continued to attack that barrier. Once. Twice. Thrice. Yishiwen had lost count of how many times he had attacked that barrier. He himself became somewhat numb to the rebounds of the impacts, but he still continued to attack the realm's barrier. He was clinging to the idea that he might succeed if he continued to attack the barrier to no end. Bang! Yishiwen's real elemental energy somewhat dried up after another routine of attacks. He was thinking whether or not to replenish his energy with the primary spirit dawn. However, that majestic barrier, which had remained unbudged even after facing ceaseless attack, suddenly opened up. It seemed as if Yishiwen's real elemental energy had finally broken through a huge threshold, and had forged ahead into a new and vast world. And then suddenly it began to flow smoothly. Yishiwen's aura also rose incredibly. There was nothing around him except his new semi-sage aura, and it continued to revolve non-stop. Countless principles rushed into his body, and his body began to transform. Yishiwen could distinctly feel that his body was undergoing an unfathomable transformation. It seemed as if his body was transcending and approaching towards becoming an even more advanced form of life. It seemed as if an ant was transforming into a human being. It was obviously an entirely different level of feeling. However, the transformation stopped midway. Yishiwen frowned at this. He felt as if he had been enjoying inside the cool seawater in the summer, but someone suddenly dragged him to the shore and exposed him to the sun. He knew that the rest of the transformation would be completed when he'd enter the sage realm. Yishiwen frantically began to absorb the surrounding principles without any delay. They condensed in the form of magical symbols, and entered his body one by one. These principles then condensed into talismans with magical symbols on them. These were far thicker than the ordinary semi-sage talismans. In fact, they were so thick that they could scare a person to death. The bottleneck of 500 Tao principles no longer existed because Yishiwen had now entered the semi-sage realm. Yishiwen continued to condense the Tao principles like a madman. 499. 500. 600. 700. 800. Yishiwen finally stopped after he had condensed 800 Tao principles. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes. At last, the semi-sage realm. To be continued. Chapter 416. Yishiwen opened his eyes, and looked all around. Things looked exactly the same as they were half a year ago. The rented rooms of these martial art experts were completely different from that of an ordinary person's. They were protected by all kinds of small-sized but solid matrix formations. Even dust couldn't enter into these rooms. Otherwise, half a year's time was enough to fill the entire room with dust. Some small-sized matrix formations were laid inside the room as well. However, Yishiwen and Huameihan had jointly laid out a big matrix formation of their own inside the room before they had started the closed-door training. They had done this to isolate their auras from the outside world. Therefore, nobody on the outside could hear the sounds that came from inside their room. There was a huge explosion at the time when Yishiwen had made a breakthrough into the semi-sage realm. However, nobody had sensed anything outside the room. He raised his head, and saw that Huameihan was sitting cross-legged in front of him. Her beautiful and gentle-looking face didn't have any expression on it. Her long and thin eyelashes were curved upward. She was in a deep level of closed-door training. Even Yishuan's breakthrough into the semi-sage realm couldn't wake her up. This meant that she felt extremely safe in this environment. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to undergo such a deep-level closed-door training here. This showed that she felt very safe in Yishuan's presence. This realization ignited a warm feeling inside Yishuan's heart. Yishuan had just stood up. However, he suddenly saw an astonishing and imposing aura shoot up from Hua Menghan's body. It almost broke through the matrix formation barrier which these two had laid out. Yishuan promptly strengthened the matrix barrier in order to suppress her imposing aura. Otherwise, the entire city would have been alarmed of their practice. Yishuan could clearly see the power of countless principles as they crazily rushed towards Hua Menghan. The Tao principles quickly took shape in the form of magical talismans, and entered her body. "Sister!" Yishuan spoke up. He was somewhat surprised. Hua Menghan's imposing aura indicated that she had already made a breakthrough into the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Yishuan could presently be regarded as the peak expert among all the experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, he would be much safer with Hua Menghan by his side. Two Heaven's Pride level experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm had joined hands. So, Yishuan was confident that they would be able to escape unscathed even if a sage expert were to attack them. Yishuan got a firm grasp on the matter of the Wind Dragon lair. It was anticipated to be born soon. Yishuan was undergoing closed-door training. However, this didn't mean that he didn't know anything about the Wind Dragon's lair. Hua Menghan was undergoing a deep-level closed-door training. Therefore, he sent out a portion of his divine sense outside the room, and heard the discussions of several people. He got to know everything about all the major events that had taken place in the last half a year's time. He was very interested in the Wind Dragon's lair. Moreover, he knew far more about it than an average person. He had come to know everything from the star colossus that was present inside the heavenly source mirror. The wisp of the star colossus's soul had been unceasingly sucked for its energy, and this energy was then being used to condense and power up the blood slave. So, its memories were also gradually revealed in front of Yishuan. There was no difference between that wisp of soul and the main body of that star colossus, apart from certain core things such as bloodline inheritance, matrix formations, and so on. However, this wisp of soul knew everything the star colossus did. Therefore, Yishuan's knowledge had gradually enriched. It had become even more extensive after the unceasing absorption of this star colossus's memories. In fact, his knowledge had seen an incredible rise in the past half a year's time. He had come to know many of the universe's secrets. One must know that each of these star colossuses could consume planets and stars as food. And they lived for several thousand years. So, they obviously knew many secrets of the universe. They possessed rare knowledge. In fact, they were aware of all kinds of rare treasures and exotic gems which had ever existed. Even Yemo knew many such secrets. However, he had only been an assistant to a devil king. So, most of Yemo's knowledge was related to the devil world, and he didn't know about many secrets of the universe. Moreover, Yemo was like a teacher and a friend to Yishuan. So, Yishuan would never treat him like the star colossus. He wouldn't devour Yemo's soul and memories. An average person wouldn't dare to try this. Many people could peek into others' memories. However, they wouldn't dare to swallow such a mixture of soul and memories because the absorbed memory could become a portion of their own. So, it could easily affect their memory, and result in a possible identity crisis. In fact, they might even become deranged. Therefore, nobody would do it unless they were forced to do it and had no choice. However, Yishuan was different. He had the mysterious space. So, he could digest these memories without letting them affect his own. And the secret of the Wind Dragon City was present in the Star Colossus's memories. Moreover, the impression of this memory was quite profound. This Wind Dragon City had genuinely been established on the corpse of a wind dragon. That was true. This wind dragon had existed, and so had its lair. In fact, that wind dragon had been killed by the Star Colossus himself. The Star Colossus had wandered here once upon a time. It had then come across the newly matured wind dragon. Both parties were rare monsters, and stood on top of the food chain of the universe. So, they hardly said anything before they started their battle. The dragon race was a very intrepid one. Moreover, this wind dragon was a purebred of the dragon race. However, it had only matured recently. Therefore, it couldn't be a match for the Star Colossus. It eventually lost its life to the Star Colossus. However, the Star Colossus had also sustained severe injuries. So, it had no other choice but to escape in order to repair its wounds. Therefore, Yi Shiwen knew that Wind Dragon's lair really did exist. He just didn't know the specific time it would be born in this space. He also didn't know how this news had come to spread. Innumerable years had passed since that battle. Many a things had been lost in the river of time. However, one such forgotten matter had resurfaced again. Was it possible for the people to make a calculation as to where it would appear? Yi Shiwen didn't know. However, this didn't hinder his interest in the Wind Dragon's lair. Everyone knew that the dragon race was fond of collecting treasures. One could benefit immensely if they were to obtain one or two such treasures. In fact, it would be like a dream come true. Yi Shiwen saw that Hua Menghan hadn't awakened yet. She was still undergoing the deep-level closed-door training. He became somewhat anxious as to why she hadn't come out of the closed-door training already. Gee, this girl is extraordinary. She wants to cross 2 hurdles in one go. She wants to make a breakthrough into the sage realm in one fell swoop. Yemo spoke in astonishment. I must say, she is bold and ambitious. But she possesses the heavenly phoenix body, as well as the bloodline of the heavenly phoenix. She may even succeed if she gave it a try. Yi Shiwen calmed down after he heard Yemo's words. She wasn't continuing with her closed-door training because she had run into any problem or anything. Rather, she wanted to make successive breakthroughs. The inner core of that white dwarf had decreased in volume. Only 1/3 of it was left. However, it was still a lot. In fact, it was enough for both of these individuals to continue the closed-door training and make another breakthrough. Yi Shiwen would have accompanied Hua Menghan in the closed-door training if this matter of the Wind Dragon's lair hadn't come to light. His realization was already enough. His understanding regarding the principles and main Tao was extremely rare among the younger generation. In fact, his overall understanding was enough to enable him to level up without any difficulty. However, he had been presented with an excellent opportunity. There could be rare treasures inside the lair of the Wind Dragon. He naturally didn't wish to miss out on this opportunity. He could come back and proceed with the closed-door training after he had dealt with this matter. A martial arts competition would take place between the 4 forces after 2 years' time. This would be a big and brutal gathering of experts. And not every Heaven's Pride level experts would get to participate in the fights. However, Yi Shiwen was sure about himself. He was certain that he would get to take part in the competition. After all, only he had the outstanding accomplishments among all Heaven's Pride level experts. The Titan Body and Fan Ming were considered as top Heaven's Pride level experts. Yet he had managed to kill these two. Now, he needed to hold the line and push forward. He had killed 2 Heaven's Pride level experts. However, he hadn't taken them lightly. They used to be regarded as Heaven's Pride level experts. How could they possibly not be skilled and powerful? Yi Shiwen could have easily fallen into the gutter if he had been caught off guard. Moreover, the peak Heaven's Pride level experts of the 4 major forces would gather in such a big competition. He might be killed on the spot if he were to see the face of defeat. After all, there's no need to reiterate the main purpose why these forces would gather for a competition. As far as Yi Shiwen was concerned, he wouldn't show any mercy if need be. Yi Shiwen didn't wake Hua Menghan up, and went out the room. He hadn't gone out since half a year. However, the waiters weren't a bit baffled to see him. This entire place was full of experts. So, this kind of thing was fairly normal. These experts used to undergo closed-door training for several years, even for decades. So, this wasn't something strange. Everything was fine as long as one had enough money to pay the rent for the room. Yishiwen looked for a spot to sit down inside the tavern. A bunch of news fell into his ears from the surroundings. Everyone is saying that the Wind Dragon's lair is about to be born. But why has there been no concrete information about it in the last 6 months? It's probably a lie. Maybe. But I think that it's true. Even the respectable city lord has dispatched experts. In fact, he himself has gone out thrice to look for the entrance to this Wind Dragon's lair in this last half a year. He didn't find it though. However, I think this must be true for someone of his status to try so hard to find it. I don't know where this news has come out from, but many powerful experts have gone out to look for the whereabouts of the Wind Dragon's lair in the last half a year. In fact, many sage experts were also present among them. They couldn't find the lair, but they have found some traces of it. This shows that Wind Dragon's lair genuinely exists. Yes, it is also said that the Wind Dragon's lair isn't in this subspace, right? So, ordinary people certainly can't see it. It has also been said that the major forces have reached out to some knowledgeable experts, and have requested them to find out the time and place that Wind Dragon's lair will appear. Yishiwen pondered that no one had been able to find the whereabouts of the Wind Dragon's lair in the past half a year's time. However, he wasn't in a hurry, nor was he anxious. That was because others didn't know the whereabouts of the lair of the Wind Dragon, but he did since the Star Colossus had already passed through this region of space in the past, and had a battle with the Wind Dragon. The Wind Dragon's lair is born. A loud roar came from outside the tavern, right when Yishiwen was pondering. To be continued. Chapter 4:17. The Wind Dragon's lair has appeared. Suddenly, the entire Wind Dragon city began to seethe with excitement. Everyone had been looking for the whereabouts of this Wind Dragon's lair for last half a year's time. It could be said that it had attracted the attention of every person present in the Wind Dragon city. However, they hadn't been able to find any whereabouts of the Wind Dragon's lair in this half a year's time. However, it had finally appeared. Soon, the accurate news spread. It was reported that a semi-sage expert had gone out to wipe out the lair of star beasts. However, he found an abnormality in the space inside this lair. He might not have paid attention to it on ordinary days. After all, there were many such strange places in the universe. In fact, distorted and broken spaces could be found everywhere, let alone an abnormality. These places were obviously classified as forbidden and exceptionally inauspicious areas. An average person wouldn't dare to go near such places. However, the matter of the Wind Dragon's lair had become widely famous in this last half a year. Therefore, this expert had been keen on finding it, like every other person. As a result, he ended up finding a planet. And this planet had life on it. It was reported that many sage experts inspected and verified that this planet was indeed the lair of the Wind Dragon. It was brimming with thick dragon power even after countless years. In addition, a large number of demon beasts were living on this planet. Moreover, they all possessed the blood of the dragon race. Yishiwen was surprised to hear this. He hadn't anticipated that the Wind Dragon's lair would have turned into a planet, and would have been able to support life after so many years. He had searched through the memory of the Star Colossus, and had come to know that this Wind Dragon's lair used to be a desolate planet. Many planets in this vast universe supported life. However, only a few planets could transform into a living world. Indeed, this planet now supported life, but the world it hosted was far more advanced than the planet itself. Only 1 or 2 planets among countless ones could get the opportunity to transform into a world. This was extremely rare. The experts couldn't help but proceed towards the Wind Dragon's lair after they obtained this news. These experts weren't ordinary people. In fact, many of these experts had survived in the universe for years, and this was nothing short of incredible. And now, they had simultaneously rushed towards the Wind Dragon's lair. These advancing experts seemed like a grandiose army going on an expedition. They even possessed various kinds of beasts as their mounts. In fact, it almost appeared as if cavalry troops were going on a punitive conquest. However, Yishiwen was in no hurry. So, he first went back to the inn in order to safeguard Hua Menghan. He laid out a huge matrix so that nobody could disturb her during the closed-door training. Moreover, many experts of the true martial university were present in the city, and they could look after her if something were to happen. Therefore, it would be safer for her to stay here. Yu Shiwen left for the Wind Dragon's lair after he had safeguarded Hua Menghan. He finally arrived over a planet after he had passed through several ruptured spaces on the way. It appeared endless, and stretched as far as one could see. It was an enormous planet. It was different from other planets. It was clearly visible that this planet was brimming with life, even if one looked from space. Yu Shiwen had excellent eyesight. He could clearly see the mountains, forests, rivers, and seas from the space. Yu Shiwen somewhat sighed with emotion. He knew this planet from the memory of the Star Colossus. However, he hadn't anticipated that it would transform so much and become like this. Yu Shiwen opened his devil wings. He transformed into a golden streamer of light, and burst into the atmosphere of this planet. The endless mountain ranges stretched for countless kilometers. They appeared like a giant dragon to Yu Shiwen. The ancient sky-touching trees rose straight from the ground. These trees had blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they formed a huge forest. The demon beast's terrifying roars reverberated on the surface. The sonic booms dissipated in all directions. This place didn't look like a normal place. The demon beasts, which possessed the bloodline of the dragon race, were lurking everywhere. So, how could this place still be normal? The dragon race was considered a supreme race in the universe. And these demon beasts had some connection with the dragon's characteristics. Hence, they were extremely dreadful as well. Yu Shiwen saw a seriously damaged forest as soon as he landed on the planet. It seemed as if this forest had hosted a fierce battle. An expert must have visited this place. This planet was extremely huge. One couldn't see its edge. So, it wasn't easy to find the treasures the Wind Dragon had left behind. However, that didn't affect the spirits of the experts. Nothing as easy as the beginning. So, how would they obtain enormous benefits if they didn't pay the price? Yu Shiwen flew for hundreds of miles. He could see all kinds of rare herbs almost everywhere. It was extremely hard to find these herbs elsewhere since the dragon race had vanished long ago, more so because these herbs were related to the dragon race. However, these herbs could be seen everywhere on this planet. Yu Shiwen had once visited the Flood Dragon's tomb. But even that was nothing in comparison to this planet. This Wind Dragon was a pure blood of the dragon race. So, he was far superior to that Flood Dragon since it was a mixed blood. That Flood Dragon's tomb was indeed very big. However, a big faction had been stationed there for a long time. Therefore, the herbs must have already been plundered by the faction. However, precious drug ingredients were present here in abundance, and these herbs could increase a person's lifespan by 5 to 10 years. Yu Shiwen stretched out his big hand, and grasped several of these herbs. Then, he put them inside the heavenly source mirror. These drug ingredients were top-notch, and could help him in concocting high-level immortality pills with the help of his alchemy furnace. This planet was occupied by the Wind Dragon once upon a time. The dragon is now dead, but this place is still as contaminated with his blood, essence, and dragon energy. And the dragon energy has managed to evolve this planet into such a treasure trove after countless years of development. Yemo spoke up in astonishment. This planet would have stayed barren if that Wind Dragon hadn't occupied it. Yu Shiwen continued to walk, and continued to collect these drug ingredients. The harvest was plentiful this time. Roar! Yu Shiwen wanted to penetrate even further. However, a terrifying dragon roar suddenly reverberated in the surroundings. Hundreds of pointed-beaked dragons appeared in front of Yu Shiwen. This territory belonged to a group of pointed-beaked dragons. These dragons possessed long and pointed beaks. Their mouths were adorned with sharp teeth. They weren't extremely tall, and appeared equal to the combined height of 2 men. They had 2 strong legs, and possessed 2 small claws that protruded from their chest. They looked exceptionally frightening. Roar! 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 These hundreds of pointed-beaked dragons roared in unison. The monstrous demon energy began to boil over their bodies. These dragons possessed the strength of Legendary's great complete realm. The few dragons at the forefront possessed the strength of the initial and intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. They were extremely tyrannical. "I hadn't anticipated that I'd be seeing so many sub-dragons here," Yemo said. "Very few people have seen so many sub-dragons roaming around after the disappearance of the dragon race. These creatures were born by being moistened in dragon energy. So, each of these dragons possessed the blood of a real dragon. They were extremely rare in the outside world. Yishuan, kill these pointed-beaked dragons and extract their blood. The dragon race has the highest lifespan in the world. Even one drop of a real dragon's blood can increase your lifespan by 10 years, Yemo promptly said. Moreover, it can also strengthen your gilded tyrant form. The dragon race possessed intrepid body. It was famous in the world for that. It had been said that one could become a peerless genius after they had bathed in dragon's blood. The strength of Yishuan's gilded tyrant form would definitely increase enormously if he could absorb the dragon's blood into his gilded tyrant form. Yishuan's spirits suddenly rose up after he heard this. He felt that his lifespan wasn't sufficient, even after he had entered the semi-sage realm. A person would have boundless future prospects if they could step into the semi-sage realm under the age of 30. Their lifespan also would be enough. Stepping into the sage realm wouldn't be a problem for them. However, it wasn't the same for Yishuan. His lifespan was mostly consumed by the Phoenix regeneration technique. He couldn't unceasingly consume the longevity dawn either. Therefore, he was very interested in increasing his lifespan in whichever way possible. Roar! Several pointed-beaked dragons opened their big mouths like a sacrificial bull, and revealed their big and ferocious teeth. They spat chilled energy. This energy condensed into energy swords, and darted towards Yishuan. These sub-dragons were born with magical powers. Yishuan was greatly amazed by this. This was almost an instinctive type of magical power. So, it was far more ferocious than the acquired powers of the human race. These magical powers were often inherited from the blood. These pointed-beaked dragons might not have any wisdom. However, they could frequently display their magical powers to perfection. Yishuan stretched out his big hand, and weaved an energy shield before him. He had formed a huge 8 trigrams chart before himself. Bang! Repelled! Bang! A huge explosion occurred as these energy swords rumbled against the 8 divinatory trigrams. However, these attacks couldn't sway the 8 divinatory trigrams, and were immediately transformed into a mass of energy. Yishuan's index finger and middle finger stuck together, and that mass of lingering energy suddenly transformed into energy swords and darted out. Poochie! A pointed-beaked dragon couldn't evade the attack, and was split into 2 halves. However, its death didn't make those other moderately sized sub-dragons cower in fear. It stirred them up on the contrary, and they rushed towards Yishuan to kill him. The energy swords ripped apart the vast sky, and swept towards Yishuan from all directions. There was no way out of this encirclement. These pointed-beaked dragons were working together as a team, as if they were casually hunting a prey. They appeared exceptionally skillful. They possessed better mutual understanding than a usual small group of experts. So, when some attacked Yishuan, the others ensured that he didn't get a chance to retreat. The corners of Yishuan's mouth curled up. He realized that these ferocious animals possessed some hunting wisdom. However, it would be a big mistake on their part if they were to consider him an ordinary prey. Yishuan casually made a hand gesture, and a body-size 8 trigrams chart appeared around him. These energy swords couldn't break Yishuan's 8 trigrams chart. They could only produce some ripples in the 8 trigrams chart before they ultimately got submerged in it. Clang! 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 Several energy swords congealed around Yishuan's body. He used a hand seal, and the energy swords went flying out in all directions, whoosh, 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 and those fierce dragons got chopped into 2 halves. To be continued. Chapter 418. The heavenly source mirror absorbed the flesh and blood of these pointed-beaked dragons. Then, it extracted the real dragon's blood. However, it could only manage to extract 1/10 of a drop. Yishuin exclaimed, and thought that this whole planet was covered with dragons' treasures. He would have to slaughter these subdragons to obtain these treasures since they possessed the blood of a real dragon. However, there was a gap of countless years between them and the real dragon. So, extracting real dragon's blood was easier said than done. Yishuin didn't wait any longer after they extracted the blood of the real dragon. He continued to go deeper into the forest. He flew for almost half a month, and penetrated very deep inside the forest. He had also killed several subdragons on the way, and had done all he could to extract even a drop of the real dragon's blood. As that man had said earlier, this place was like the country of dragon race. Only subdragons were present here, but this was already enough for a lot of experts. Several experts were planning to turn one of these subdragons into their mounts. It would certainly add to their power and prestige if they could take a subdragon as their mount. Yishuin heard a lot of news in this half a month's time. Some people had obtained enormous treasures, and some people had been killed by the angry dragons. Not all dragons had low wisdom. Many dragons were wise. The invasion of human experts had angered the local dragon tribes, and they had mobilized forces to slaughter these experts. Yishuin started walking more carefully after he heard these things. He concealed his breath, as well as his presence using the restraining breath technique. This also helped him in becoming even more sensitive to the surrounding auras. He wanted to avoid the sage experts. It would be dismal if he were to be pursued by a sage-level dragon. He would surely be able to run away from the fight. However, he didn't want to risk being pursued. Roar! The sound of a dragon's roar came from the front. Terrifying dragon energy swept into the sky. It was mixed with a demonic aura. Several experts were coming from afar. They were frantically trying to escape from a liger-type dragon that was chasing after them. It was as tall as a mountain. Its body was like a hybrid of lion and tiger. However, its head and tail appeared as those of a dragon. It possessed a substantial amount of blood of the dragon race. It was extremely tyrannical. It had already reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. It possessed 700 Tao principles inside its body. It would be no different from throwing away one's life if an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm, who just had 500 Tao principles, were to come across such a vicious beast. The experts who were trying to flee this monster suddenly became delighted when they saw Yishuin. Various colors flashed in their eyes as they simultaneously ran towards Yishuin. How couldn't Yishuin know their plan? These guys were trying to save themselves by luring the liger dragon towards Yishuin. They would then hope for him to deal with on their behalf. One doesn't need to run the fastest when danger approaches. One just needs to run faster than others. This is a brutal truth. They would find enough time to run as long as Yishuin could stop this liger dragon for a while. These people could do anything in order to survive. In fact, they would have even dumped the members of their own group at the time of danger. And Yishuin was an outsider. The leader of these experts saw Yishuin standing motionlessly like a silly guy. He smirked in his heart, and flew towards Yishuin. He secretly admitted his bad luck. He didn't know how many years misfortune had erupted all of a sudden since he had ended up provoking this liger dragon on this day. He had merely come to seek valuable treasures. He hadn't even gotten started when he ended up attracting this liger dragon attention. The liger dragon obviously started to chase him thereafter. He just wanted this fool to resist it long enough to help them escape. However, these people weren't the least concerned with Yishuin's life or death. Their humanity and righteousness had died out since they had followed the law of the jungle for several hundred years. Whoosh! The sword energy suddenly burst out from Yishuin's fingertips, and surged forward. It blazed out, and chopped those experts to pieces. Yishuin's eyes looked ice-cold. There wasn't a single trace of mercy in them. These people had intended to use him as a shield in order to stop this liger dragon from chasing after them. They didn't possess any good intentions. Their cruel intentions were self-evident, and so many in number that it would be hard to count them. However, he hadn't anticipated that the overbearing Liger Dragon would stop after he'd disposed off these experts. A somewhat pondering look flashed through its eyes. This Liger Dragon was quite high-handed. It possessed high wisdom. It wasn't like those other muddle-headed beasts. This Liger Dragon was the lord of this area. It had reached the late stage of semi-sage realm in just 100 years of cultivation. This was extraordinary. It was very close to the bloodline of the real dragon. It wasn't like those other ordinary sub-dragons which Ishiwen had seen so far on this planet. That's why its cultivation had reached such an extent in merely 100 years. The dragon race possessed extremely long lifespan. Even sub-dragons were no exception. Mere 100 years weren't considered long from their standards. Their lifespan was 10 times more than that of human experts. This beast wasn't inferior to the Heaven's Pride level experts of the human race. The law of the jungle was followed more strictly in the world of these demon beasts than it was in the human one. This Liger Dragon had come to the top fighting all the way from the bottom in such a cruel world. And it had obtained the position of the lord of this area. So, it possessed far more fighting experience than Ishiwen did. It had preyed on several sub-dragons of the semi-sage realm before, and had killed them to become the lord of this area. In fact, its innate talent had attracted the attention of the ancestors of this planet. It didn't pay attention to ordinary semi-sage demon beasts. It had chased and killed several beasts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. In fact, semi-sage sub-dragons had already gone extinct in this area because of it. As a result, this area had become its territory. Many sub-dragons used to say that it would perhaps ascend to the sage realm in less than 100 years. It would truly bring all sub-dragons of this area under his control if that were to happen. And it would become the genuine dragon king of this territory. However, it felt true fear and trepidation when he came face to face with Ishiwen. Ishiwen had casually killed several human experts of the semi-sage realm. It was baffled, and its eyelids jumped. It felt firmly restrained inside, as if it was staring at an ominous beast. It didn't know that Ishiwen had made his way here by killing God knows how many dragons. In fact, he had also killed many species related to the dragon race before he had arrived here. These were just sub-dragons, but thanks to his mysterious space, he had somewhat faintly comprehended the slaying dragon technique. He had started to faintly sense the weaknesses of the dragons, and could land fatal blows every time he fought with them. Ishiwen might not be able to perfect this slaying dragon technique in his entire life since it was merely in the embryonic form at the moment. However, his killing intention wasn't concealed one bit. It was permeating everywhere around him, and had left the Liger Dragon to tremble with fear. This abrupt surge of dread had made it feel weird. It possessed extraordinary bloodline. So, it was naturally very tyrannical. It believed that it was the top-notch fierce beast in the entire world. How could some human be crueler than it? The ordinary dragons of the late stage of the semi-sage realm used to be slaughtered by it just like dogs. Yet, this human had aroused such a feeling in its heart. Ishiwen looked at this Liger Dragon just when it was suppressing that inexplicable feeling of dread in its heart. It appeared like a hybrid of lion and tiger. Its shiny fur glowed like some lustrous metal. Its head and tail were densely covered with palm-sized cyan-colored scales. They were faintly emitting greenish light in the sunlight. Its robust body contained unfathomable power. Ishiwen could tell that it was the lord of this area. Perhaps the blood of the real dragon was stronger in this Liger Dragon. Ishiwen might obtain several drops of blood by slaughtering it. The amount of blood running in its body wasn't dependent on its strength. Rather, it was related to the purity of the blood. This Liger Dragon possessed an ample amount of blood of the dragon race. It was far purer than the blood of those other sub-dragon whom Ishiwen had killed earlier. It could be compared with the flood dragons. In fact, its blood was even somewhat purer than the blood of that young flood dragon which Ishiwen had earlier encountered. However, he didn't dare to treat it lightly. This Liger Dragon was powerful enough to be able to kill a Heaven's Pride level expert. The Liger Dragon couldn't keep his patience, and became restless and irritated. It roared again and again. It opened its big mouth like a sacrificial bull. It quickly rushed forward to kill. This Liger Dragon had finally decided to attack Yishiwen first in order to gain the upper hand after it had waited for a long time. It could feel the divinities running in Yishiwen's body, and was attracted to it. It could faintly feel that the Sage Realm wouldn't be far away from its reach if it could kill Yishiwen, and swallow his body. It would be able to make a breakthrough in just a few years instead of 100. The greed had leapt up in its heart, and the Liger Dragon couldn't control it any longer. Moreover, Yishiwen had only scared it somewhat. It wasn't a feeling of absolute danger or anything. Yishiwen saw this fierce dragon approach. The dragon's roar cut across the vast horizon. Its energy surged up, and began to roll and boil in the sky. Its energy pierced through the vast sky and spread everywhere. It was an ominous beast. One couldn't tell how many demon beasts it had swallowed in these many years. Its murderous aura condensed and scattered everywhere. Clang! The sword in tension condensed into a long sword in Yishiwen's hand. He brandished the sword, and it seemed as if the world had lost its color. It seemed as if the sun and the moon had lost their brightness, like the end of the world had come to pass. Rumble! Yishiwen's palms swept downward along with the long sword. It cut through the space, and into the body of that ominous beast. Poochie! Blood gushed out from the body of that fierce beast. Its lustrous scales should have been difficult to damage, but they had been broken by Yishiwen's one sword attack. The blood splashed out. Roar! This Liger Dragon screamed. It had finally realized that it had messed with the wrong man, that it wasn't the top-notch beast in this world. It wasn't even the second or third best. There would always be a more savage and ominous beast than it. It felt that there was no difference between Yishiwen and a stubborn ominous beast, just like the dragons were considered as a bunch of savage beasts by the humans. The Liger Dragon screamed endlessly. It had never come across such a ferocious man. Its body was as big as a small mountain, and Yishiwen's body was as thin as a piece of paper. However, an incredible power had emerged from such a slim body, and had sent its mountain-like body flying. To be continued. Chapter 419. Someone would always be crueler than the Liger Dragon. This person in front of him was just a human. And humans were nothing more than ant-sized existences in its eyes. Blood gushed out from that very deep cut, and sprinkled around. Roar! The Liger Dragon screamed and roared loudly. It coldly stared at Yishiwen with its bloodshot eyes. Yishiwen should be able to extract several drops of real dragon's blood after he had killed this Liger Dragon. This meant that his lifespan would increase by several decades. He couldn't help but be tempted by this. The Liger Dragon became violent after it sustained these injuries. It suddenly charged towards Yishiwen as it roared. Human, I will tear you to shreds! It roared loudly. The entire atmosphere began to boil endlessly. It had come so far by killing everything that had stood in its path since it was a cub. So, its accumulated murderous aura was absolutely astonishing. Yishiwen also rushed forth, and slashed with his sword. It seemed as if his sword would destroy the world. He appeared like the reincarnation of a sword god with a golden armor draped over his body. This made him appear like a golden god of war. His long sword was constantly contended to win in his hand. Bang! Yishiwen brandished his long sword, and roared. It seemed as if the unleashed energy would swallow the mountains and rivers. The golden rays of light covered his body, and started to appear like a golden armor. Whoosh! 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 Yishiwen's long sword cut right into the Liger Dragon's body, and sparks flew in all directions. It seemed as if the long sword had struck against a metal. There was a burst of roars immediately after. The scales on the body of that Liger Dragon had been split open by Yishiwen's sword attack. Yishiwen had attacked countless times with his sword in that split second, and the scales on the Liger Dragon's body had been broken due to this. The space got torn open like piece of paper wherever Yi Shiwen's sword intention went. The chaos energy leaked out from the broken space, and unceasingly opened wounds on that liger dragon's body. This was an exceptionally terrifying scene. The liger dragon became angrier as it faced such a terrifying attack. It had reached a long way by beating his opponents. Nobody had ever forced it into such a disadvantageous situation. It had bullied everyone since the beginning. However, it didn't matter whether it possessed magical powers or intrepid body in the present situation. It had been thoroughly forced into a disadvantageous position by Yi Shiwen. Its hill-sized body was a mere joke in front of Yi Shiwen. Bang! The collision occurred, and the liger dragon went flying by the terrifying force. Yi Shiwen just stood motionless while the loud metallic sound of the collision between gold and iron reverberated. Rumble! The entire void crumbled. This scene was just too horrible. The divine senses of the sub-dragons, which were lurking in the surroundings, were retracted. These two individuals were extremely ferocious existences of their generation. It was difficult to tell who was fiercer among these two. Yet, it was clear to everyone that they might have to suffer a calamity if they dared to infuriate these two individuals at this moment. This liger dragon definitely possesses the blood of a pure real dragon. That's why its body is so formidable, Emo said. Yi Shiwen nodded. He was certainly very aware of the capabilities of his own body. He knew that he could effortlessly tear a god or a devil with his bare hands. Not to mention that an ordinary person would be dismembered by a mere slap of his. He had been able to come this far. This was enough to prove that his body was extraordinary. The liger dragon was also extraordinary. However, it wasn't a pure-blood dragon. In fact, considering its current strength, even Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been its match if it were a pure-blood dragon. Yi Shiwen's current realm would have been insufficient in that case. This was his weak point. He possessed incomparable fighting strength. Let alone the experts of the same realm. Even the experts of the higher realms weren't his match. He usually didn't pay attention to ordinary experts, but he could fall in a very difficult situation if he were to come across a top-tier Heaven's Pride level expert of a higher realm. He wasn't afraid of anyone in the same realm. However, his realm was always lacking in comparison to his opponent. This was his biggest worry. Yi Shiwen's eyes turned ice-cold. The dragon race had lived up to their incredible reputation. This was an impure sub-dragon, but it still wasn't something an average expert could deal with. Obediently hand over the real dragon's blood to me, Yi Shiwen softly said. Roar! Human, you are courting death! The liger dragon immediately became angry. It also coveted Yi Shiwen's divinities, but this was its personal matter. However, its pride would never allow someone to treat it as a prey. It certainly wouldn't let someone kill itself. The liger dragon faced upwards and roared. It seemed as if it would grab and break the universe with its front claws. It was alone, but its overwhelming murderous aura blotted out the sky and covered the earth, like a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. Die! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He pulled out his golden form, and rushed towards the liger dragon to kill it. His golden divinity surged forth, and blotted out the sky and covered the earth like a gigantic sea wave. The sword intention mixed with his divinities, and soared in the vast sky. It shattered the space in its wake. Rumble! The heaven and the earth trembled. The fight between these two individuals had reached its climax. Their murderous auras swept down from the heaven, and their fighting intentions cut across the vast sky. Yi Shiwen had obtained the upper hand in the present situation. However, this liger dragon was no pushover either. It could kill an ordinary expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm in just one move and swallow them whole. It could have become the overlord of this region if it hadn't come across the wrong person. In fact, entering the sage realm would have been a piece of cake for it in time. Yi Shiwen had completely suppressed this liger dragon, and it had fallen into a grossly disadvantageous position. However, it hadn't been easy for Yi Shiwen to kill it in a short period of time. Puchi! Yishiwen's long sword opened a huge wound on that Liger Dragon's body, and its blood splashed out. The Liger Dragon roared since its body had been nearly pierced by Yishiwen's attack. An ordinary iron sword wouldn't have been able to move its hair. However, it knew that Yishiwen would destroy its internal organs after his sword had penetrated its body. In fact, it wouldn't be able to save its soul either. Suddenly, the demon energy condensed around the Liger Dragon's body. It instantly spat out dragon breath. Only a purebred dragon or a dragon with its bloodline close to the dragon race could spit dragon breath. A pureblood dragon could instinctively spit the dragon breath. However, a sub-dragon could only spit dragon breath if its bloodline was very close to the dragon race. But it must practice to an extremely profound realm in order to display such supernatural powers. Several martial arts of the dragon race essentially needed one to make great efforts to move in the direction of attained pure blood. This situation was extremely common in the universe. There was a time in the ancient era when the ancestors of various races possessed invincible strength. However, these present younger generations were striving to attain pure blood in order to reach closer to their ancestors. The atmosphere began to burn under the enormous power of this dragon breath. The dreadful divine power was overflowing from Yishiwen's long sword. He was much shorter than this Liger Dragon. However, he had been crushing it and suppressing it like a mountain. And the space would collapse and break into small pieces wherever he went. Bang! Yishiwen's long sword defeated the dragon breath. He stood on the Liger Dragon's body and slashed open a very deep wound on it. Its bones became visible through the wound. The Liger Dragon's tough body was cut like a piece of clay by Yishiwen's sword attack. The long sword cut open a huge wound on its body, and blood started to gush out of it. The Liger Dragon's hill-sized body rumbled to the ground under the influence of the power of Yishiwen's sword. Yishiwen didn't hold back this time. A Han seal appeared in the sky, and pounded on its body like a huge mountain. Bang! It pounded on the Liger Dragon's skull, and cracked it open. The brain matter gushed out from its broken head. It was an exceptionally dreadful scene. The Liger Dragon screamed continually. No strength was left in its body. Yishiwen's attack had rendered it powerless. Clang! Yishiwen stretched out his palm, and a long sword condensed in it. His expression didn't change. Finally, it was the time to give a final blow to this Liger Dragon. Afterwards, he could extract the several drops of real dragon's blood that ran through its body. Yishiwen had become somewhat excited. This was the land of dragons. So, it was like a treasure planet for ambitious people. Of course, he wasn't the only one who was contemplating to extract the blood of real dragon. This place would continue to witness incredible killing expeditions once the news about this place would gradually spread out. This place would inevitably witness bloodbath everywhere. However, Yishiwen had no relation with all that. He would leave after he had found the things he needed. But the killing expeditions might continue here for 100 or 200 years, until the dragons had been completely wiped off from the surface of this planet, or perhaps until the local dragon tribes killed or scared away the invading human experts, demon beasts, and the star beasts. Yishiwen was about to kill this Liger Dragon when a startling and divine rainbow suddenly fell from the sky and impacted upon its body. Bang! That fierce Liger Dragon was killed in a flash. It had been eradicated efficiently, without any wasted effort. A group of people arrived immediately after. They were treading on rainbow lights. This was a group of formidable human experts. Each of them was a young expert of approximately 25 or 26 years old. Their auras surged up, one by one. They were the top experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Every individual had condensed 600 to 700 Tao principles. The late stage of the semi-sage realm only required 500 Tao principles. Theoretically speaking, one could prepare to make a breakthrough into the sage realm after they had condensed 500 Tao principles. However, only a few people were in such a hurry to make a breakthrough to the sage realm. That was because the semi-sage realm could accommodate up to 999 principles. So, one could truly complete the semi-sage realm only after they had condensed 999 principles. They could thereafter break through to the sage realm, and reach the peak of the initial stage of the sage realm. In other words, one wouldn't be considered at the bottom of the sage realm after the breakthrough unless they had condensed 999 principles. Therefore, every ambitious expert chose to make an attempt to have a breakthrough after they had condensed 999 principles. Moreover, these people seemed to have practiced for up to 100 or 200 years. So, they would be considered as elites among elites since they had practiced to such an extent. To be continued. Chapter 420. These people might be the top elites. They were surely a bit older among the other disciples of this session. However, they were absolute elites. In fact, they weren't much inferior to the Heaven's Pride level experts. And they could even force a Heaven's Pride level expert to retreat if they were to join hands. Every force like the true Marshall University considered the time of more than 100 years to calculate the capability of an expert. In fact, comparisons were often drawn between the older disciples of adjacent sessions. That was because the difference between the older disciples of different sessions wasn't too big. This disparity was indeed quite evident in the beginning. But it gets difficult to make breakthroughs after the passage of several decades. In fact, sometimes it takes more than 10 years or even several decades. Hence, the gap between the older disciples becomes rather non-existent at that point of time. This group of 7 people was headed by a young man. He was approximately 27 or 28 years old in appearance. He looked handsome and extraordinary. He had the vigor of a dragon, and the ferocity of a tiger. His overconfidence was reflecting from his body language. "This liger dragon belongs to us. You should hurry and leave. We don't wish to make things difficult for you." A woman stepped forward from this man's back, and spoke in an indifferent manner. She didn't even look at Yishiwen as she said that. Yishiwen was just an ordinary expert of the initial stage of semi-sage realm in her opinion, 1. So, he didn't hold the authority to talk to them on equal terms. Yishiwen felt a little baffled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What was this? They were trying to steal his prey. However, their facial expressions showed as if they were doing charity. A fierce light flashed through Yishiwen's eyes. His countenance turned cold as he looked at the man in front of him. And the corners of his mouth curled up to reveal a smile of mockery. There were 4 men and 3 women among those 7 people. Each of these individuals was an outstanding expert. Their imposing auras were quite oppressive. And their imposing auras simultaneously acted upon him to overwhelm him once they realized that Yishiwen wasn't leaving. The air around his body distorted thereafter. "Why are you gawking like a fool? We are in a good mood today. But don't blame us for our impolite behavior if you don't leave," that woman reminded Yishiwen quite gently. "Get lost quickly," another man shouted rudely. He was attentively looking at the corpse of that liger dragon since they would soon get to extract the drops of the real dragon's blood. It was nothing less than a heavy treasure for them. A person could cultivate only to a certain extent of time. These people were outstanding experts. However, they were also trapped in the limitation of time. So, they would also have to embrace death on the road of cultivation at some point. "I am the one who killed this liger dragon. So, it should obviously be mine," Yishiwen solemnly said. The killing intention was already boiling in his heart. They wanted the real dragon's blood, but so did Yishiwen. There was no problem if they had killed it. However, Yishiwen had killed it with his own efforts. Moreover, they had arrived late, and still wanted to snatch away the corpse. He couldn't possibly allow such a thing to happen. "We have pursued this liger dragon for 3 days. We were about to kill it when you came out and stole our prey. Do you still need a reason?" A man frowned as he coldly said. His ice-cold vision pierced through Yishiwen. Good. You are so shameless. I haven't seen a shameless person like you in a while." Yishiwen burst into laughter. His killing intention was still seething. They had pursued this liger dragon for 3 days. What a joke! This liger dragon had been present inside its lair. What was the need to pursue it? They were obviously making things up thoughtlessly. According to the division of territories which was agreed upon, this area falls under our jurisdiction. You will fall prey to our crueler methods if you refuse to leave. The leader of the group spoke up. He wasn't being aggressive. He was clearly ignoring Yishiwen since he had said this without even looking Yishiwen in the eye. Division? What division? I don't know when that happened. Yishiwen frowned and said. Yishiwen pondered secretly. It's possible that this might have happened. No wonder he had seen other experts flying towards different regions in the past. They hadn't merely gathered at one place and gone their own ways. It might be possible that this land had been partitioned at the time when they had first landed on this enormous planet. However, he was unaware of it since he hadn't arrived at that time. He had arrived later. However, he had nothing to do with this. He hadn't participated in the partition. So, it was basically just a trifling matter for him. This partition was nothing more than a joke in the eyes of a genuinely strong powerhouse. There would be no problems as long as there were no treasures involved. However, everyone would indulge in a fight if some treasure were to emerge. The so-called partition of land would then be reduced to a big joke. There's no point in talking nonsense with him. Just kill him, and end this farce. An impatient expert at the back couldn't tolerate any more and shouted. He should have a lot of good stuff on him. Let's seize them together. Sun rises from the east. An expert shouted loudly. Suddenly, that expert launched an attack. His palm congealed into a fist and rumbled towards Yishiwen. A heat wave struck against everyone's face. The red-colored divine beam condensed into a huge dazzling sun as it swept down towards Yishiwen. This expert had practiced a technique known as Red Sun Tyrant Fist technique. It was extremely overbearing. An average person simply couldn't resist such an attack. He seemed like an unparalleled and unstoppable tyrant. The way of the tyrant was something that could force the entire world into submission, and could crush any form of resistance. However, the basic requirement for this entailed that one must have enough strength. A person could become overbearing and invincible once they possessed enough strength. However, such a person was bound to suffer a loss when they would come across someone stronger than them. And this guy had unfortunately come across the equally tyrannical Yishiwen. Yishiwen had also attacked. He had used the move Divine Dragon Flings Its Tail this time. Yishiwen's arm transformed into a bulky dragon, and this dragon started to swing its tail. An endless sea of divinities swept down and began to boil. The faint sounds of winds and thunders erupted as the sea of divinities surged forth. Crash bang! The space had been torn open from the middle, almost as if it were a painting. And then, the broken pieces of space rolled down like a mountain avalanche. Rumble! The big and round sun looked extremely brilliant as it descended from the sky. However, it was easily destroyed and dispersed by the mountain-like dragon's tail since it was made up of endless divinities. That big sun was the creative concept of the Red Sun Tyrant Fist that this expert had practiced. However, it was no match for Yishiwen's dragon's tail attack, and got annihilated with ease. A creative concept is the embodiment of an expert's knowledge of the heavenly laws and the martial arts. And his creative concept had been destroyed just now. This had made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. He restrained himself from puking blood, and came close to fainting from that. However, the dragon's tail attack didn't stop there. The heaven-shaking might of this attack pressed down. The heaven and the earth began to tremble, and shattered into small pieces. That expert's entire arm was swept away by Yishiwen's dragon's tail. His arm got turned into a mass of blood fog. Ah! That expert screamed as his body was sent flying upside down. His body wasn't transformed into a mass of blood fog like his arm. However, the bones in his entire body had been shattered by the impact. Everyone, we mustn't let him off! The leader shouted loudly as he witnessed this. He had finally realized that this man of the initial stage of semi-sage realm wasn't an ordinary person since he hadn't shown any weakness while facing them. Moreover, he hadn't collapsed at the first blow. In fact, he might have killed them by now if they were alone instead of being in a group. He was possibly a Heaven's Pride level expert of this generation. He faintly recalled a person named Yishiwen who had come into the limelight half a year ago. It was rumored that he was merely at half-step Legendry's great complete realm when he had routed Pang Yangbo's offensive. However, Pang Yangbo was a Heaven's Pride level expert of this generation. He was an invincible expert in his realm. However, he had nearly been beaten to death by Yishiwen even though he was at a much lower realm at that time. Yishiwen genuinely possessed tyrannical strength. It was simply hard to imagine. He sucked a lump of cold air as he thought of this. However, he still didn't hesitate. He didn't change his mind because they had already ended up provoking Yishiwen by attempting to steal his loot. They hadn't only offended Yishiwen, but had also tried to suppress him. Moreover, they had tried to attack him after that. This had incited Yishiwen's retaliation. Thereafter, one of his teammates had his arm reduced to blood fog, while the bones of his body had been shattered. So, he couldn't back down since that would shatter the confidence of his team's members. He didn't have much to think in this situation. He had only one option, and that was to kill Yishiwen. He took the initiative, and launched an attack on Yishiwen. He brandished his long blade. His temperament had changed entirely. He didn't look dull anymore. A strange evil aura swept out of his body on the contrary. The long blade swept down, and the outcome was world-shaking. An endless amount of evil energy condensed and soared up. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept down towards Yishiwen to engulf him. He had practiced a power technique of the evil ways called Evil Heart Blade. The blade technique was termed as Evil Heart since it could turn a person evil. Its speed was extremely quick. It had unleashed dozens of blades in a flash. These blades chopped down the entire space between the heaven and earth. He didn't have much confidence after he had kind of guessed Yishiwen's identity. However, he had attacked with all his strength. He would have died quite miserably if he hadn't done so. Those experts behind him didn't know what had happened to their leader. They didn't understand why a powerful man like him was giving so much importance to this boy. It definitely didn't seem from this attack that their leader had held back. However, they didn't dare to say anything, and promptly rushed towards Yishiwen. It was an incredible spectacle in which the heaven and earth was left to tremble. The entire space in front of Yishiwen had completely shattered. Hardly a bit of it was left intact. Endless divine beams and murderous auras swept down from the sky. Yishiwen finally launched an attack this time. However, he merely resorted to a mediocre palm attack. It didn't create any gorgeous scenes since it was just an average palm attack. Yet, those incoming divine beams pounded upon his palms, and got blocked. They couldn't advance even a step further. Ha! Yishiwen shouted in a low voice. His big hand suddenly went up. It transformed into a big golden hand, and illuminated the surroundings with its golden brilliance. It seemed as if the god himself had stretched out his heavenly hand upon the mortal world. Those divine beams didn't stand a chance, and got caught in an instant. Then, the divine beams got crushed without posing any hindrance whatsoever. Everyone suddenly got terrified. Those people finally understood why their leader had suddenly taken this boy so seriously. This attack had been an exceptional killer move. They felt as if Yishiwen was a peerless god killer, a very frightening god killer. They wouldn't have become so agitated if Yishiwen had defeated them one at a time. They did believe themselves to be invincible. However, they didn't dare to call themselves invincible. Many stronger people lived in the same generation. Yet, Yishiwen had assumed an incredibly powerful stance this time, and had instantly defeated their joint offensive. Such strength was simply beyond their very imaginations. Moreover, he wasn't even a sage expert. He was merely an expert of the initial stage of semi-sage realm, nothing more. To be continued. Chapter 421. This was like facing someone whose achievement would always be higher than yours. You would never be able to surpass them no matter what. And this kind of desperation hits one the hardest. "Let's join together and take him down!" an expert shouted loudly. This was the so-called chasing a wild goose all day long, and then getting one's eyes pecked at the very end. Their teamwork was excellent. This wasn't their first or second time attempting to steal someone else's prey. In fact, this team of 7 people had no rival as long as they were working together, unless they were dealing with a sage expert. They were dependent on their numerical strength, and the fact that each of these individuals was an expert. And they had never been forced into a disadvantageous position. They had never suffered a loss either. However, they had come across a freak like Ishiwen this time. The more they fought with Ishiwen, the more afraid they became. It didn't make a big difference to him whether there were more people or less, unless his opponents were at the same level as him. However, an ordinary Heaven's Pride level expert would have met with a painful consequence if they were in his place. These experts shortly realized that they were no match for Ishiwen. So, they forged ahead, and launched their final attacks with full strength. Ishiwen sneered. A Han seal was formed. It then crashed down from above. Those attacks got crushed. They couldn't even reach near Ishiwen's body. These experts were soon killed by Ishiwen. He plundered their stuff from their bodies thereafter. Ishiwen took a look at these items. He had obtained several items. There were more than 300,000 primary spirit dawn in total. This much stock could be used for practicing up to 100 years, and even then it wouldn't get depleted in its entirety. These items could easily solve Ishiwen's desperate energy needs. He had left the inner core of that white dwarf with Hua Menghan since she'd require a great amount of energy in order to make a breakthrough. Ishiwen went inside the Liger Dragon's lair after he had collected its corpse. Dragons were fond of collecting precious treasures. This Liger Dragon was a sub-dragon. However, it was no exception to this affliction. Every dragon that possessed the wisdom of the dragon race had this habit of collecting treasures. Ishiwen trod on the rainbow light, and landed inside the Liger Dragon's lair. The sub-dragons present in the surroundings wouldn't dare to wander around this place. They had first been scared away by the battle between Ishiwen and that Liger Dragon, and then by the battle between Ishiwen and those 7 experts. So, they wouldn't dare to come near this place. Ishiwen was first planning to undergo closed-door training in this Liger Dragon's lair. He would also extract the drops of the real dragon's blood from its body. Fighting for so long with those enemies hadn't gone in vain. The Liger Dragon's lair was inside a cave, and this cave was hidden among the weeds. So, it wasn't visible from outside. Moreover, the Liger Dragon had always been very careful while he'd enter and exit the lair, and had ensured not to destroy these weeds. These were merely weeds, but they were still contaminated by dragon's blood and aura. Therefore, they were no ordinary weeds. Ishiwen saw a vast rice field outside the cave. Yes, that's right, a vast lush green rice field. It looked extremely beautiful as the long wheat stalks fluttered in the winds. Ishiwen was in shock when he saw this scene. Could it be that this Liger Dragon was a vegetarian? However, it wasn't an ordinary rice field. These ears of the wheat appeared blood red, with a tint of greenish-blue color. Ishiwen gasped. Strong spirit energy was floating in the surroundings. He felt a strange comfort throughout his body, as if all the arteries and veins in his body had suddenly opened up. Ishiwen immediately realized that these ears of wheat weren't ordinary ones. In fact, this wasn't ordinary rice. "It's Azura blood rice!" Yemo uttered in astonishment. "Ishiwen, you've hit the jackpot! You've found Azura blood rice!" "Azura blood rice? What is that?" Ishiwen asked. "It's a much cherished variety of rice. In fact, it's extremely rare in the devil world too. Only a few top aristocrats of the devil race get to eat it as food," Yemo replied. It's not surprising that those guys dared to run their hands on the mustache of this Liger Dragon. They had done this for the sake of this treasure. Even dying for this item wouldn't be unfair. Ishiwen heard Yemo's explanation, and finally understood what azure blood rice was. Rice was the most common of food items for the human race. Basically, a vast majority of people were dependent on it for their survival. However, the martial arts experts were an exception. They didn't need to eat food for survival. They transformed the food into the spirit energy for the sustenance of their life. In fact, there would be no problem even if they didn't eat anything for hundreds of years as long as they possessed spirit dawn or spirit stones. Moreover, one couldn't imagine the amount of food they would have to eat in order to satisfy their energy needs. There's a so-called saying, immortals eat energy as food. This was indeed the case. However, this was just one of the many reasons. The most important reason was that these experts used to temper their bodies. So, they were mostly afraid of their bodies getting infected by the foods which contained Hotian energy. The experts could become Sciention from Hotian after they had established the bridge to connect with the world. Then, they could use the Sciention energy to wash their bodies clean. Henceforth, they would become brighter and wiser, and would no longer remain ignorant. Therefore, a majority of experts didn't regard food as something important. In fact, some people ignored food altogether. They couldn't eat ordinary food. However, this didn't mean that they couldn't eat some spirit fruits. These rare heavenly materials weren't only pure and uncontaminated, they could promote one's cultivation as well. Those genuine experts often arranged the spiritual materials on the table rather than ordinary food. The impurities decreased with an increase in the grade of the item. And the benefits to their cultivation would also increase significantly. Rice also had different varieties apart from the ordinary ones. Many experts used to cultivate special rice for the members of their family. The children of many aristocratic families, or the disciples of big forces, grew up eating such rare varieties of rice since childhood. Such pure diet was capable of washing their bodies entirely. It would improve their physique as well. They would become far more ferocious than their peers as a result. However, the cultivation of such varieties of rice wasn't easy. The true Martial University also used to cultivate different variety of rice many years ago. However, they lost the area for the rice's cultivation with the passage of time. In fact, even the methods of cultivation had gone extinct. Not many people could consume these items of luxury even in a massive place like the Devil World. The azure blood rice was the most famous variety of rice. Only a few top aristocrats of the devil race had the resources to consume it. It was said that this azure blood rice was originally cultivated by the outstanding azure devil lord. In fact, it was initially circulated only among the peak azure lords of the azure race. However, it slowly began to spread among other aristocratic clans of the devil race with the passage of time. However, it was very surprising to see it grow on this planet. It didn't matter whether its cultivation method had been developed by the azure devil lord. It was bound to have a great origin if it had any connection with the Devil Lord. Yimo's previous master was also a Devil King. In fact, he was the lord of the entire Devil world. Yishuan hadn't seen the Devil King. However, he had seen the Demon Emperor. He looked exceptionally outstanding, and it had seemed as if he was the lord of the entire world. Yishuan had only seen a wisp of his soul. However, his profound image had engraved itself inside Yishuan's mind since the time he had seen him. He looked like a real man, like a man of character. The Devil King and the Demon Emperor were characters of the same level. If the Demon Emperor was so outstanding, then how could the Devil King be any different? The biggest advantage of this azure blood rice is that it can refine one's body and toughen it. The body can become tyrannical to an unfathomable extent if refined with the nourishment obtained from this azure blood rice for many years. The results will be even more incredible if an azure consumes this azure blood rice. Yemo explained. This is a big fortune for you. Your gilded tyrant form is already very tyrannical. And it will become invincible in the future if you consume this azure blood rice for many years. That liger dragon must have built its lair here because of this reason only, Yemo said. But the quantity of azure blood rice isn't enough. Yi Shiwen spoke as he looked in the direction of the azure blood rice. This azure blood rice was indeed present here in abundance. In fact, it was spread over dozens of acres. So, it was sufficient for an ordinary person. However, Yi Shiwen could consume that much of rice in one go. This variety of rice was surely outstanding. However, it required many years of consumption to show the results. That's enough to let us nurture the seeds. We can plant it inside the heavenly source mirror. Give it some time, and then you can have as much as you want. Yemo laughed out loud and continued. I don't even remember the sheer number and variety of the plants and spirit fruits my master had planted inside the heavenly source mirror back then. He had even planted various kinds of rice, many of which are already extinct. The devil world had gone out on an expedition to conquer the 10,000 worlds in the past. And everything that was looted along the way had been placed inside the heavenly source mirror by the Devil King. I know the cultivation methods for various extinct or endangered species of vegetables and fruits. Yemo triumphantly said. In those days, my master had cultivated great amounts of different varieties of rice to enrich his body. Yi Shiwen was secretly flabbergasted after he had heard this. The Devil Lord was really high-handed. One must know that it was quite difficult to find the methods to cultivate so many different varieties of rice. Moreover, it required huge amounts of natural resources for cultivation process. Ordinary people couldn't consume such precious foods. Only a few top lords in the devil world could consume it. However, the Devil Lord had cultivated rare variety of rice to enrich his body. One could clearly see the huge disparity. However, the azure blood rice can't be cultivated without a great amount of spirit energy. The azure blood rice is growing here. This indicates that the spiritual arteries must be running under this place. So, we will need to dig out the spiritual arteries from this place. And then, we will put it inside the heavenly source mirror. Yemo said as he laughed. However, it will be better if you can grab as many spiritual arteries as possible in order to get unlimited supply of energy for azure blood rice in the future. In fact, it will be better if you obtain dragon arteries. Yi Shiwen forced a smile. He even lacked primary spirit dawn most of the times. Forget about the spiritual arteries. How could it be easy to get one's hands on the spiritual arteries? To be continued. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.